Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The lake house was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it became my prison. I pulled up to the quaint cabin just as the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the still water. The stress of the past few months melted away as I breathed in the crisp, pine-scented air. This weekend getaway was exactly what I needed. No phone, no internet, no distractions, just me, my thoughts, and the peaceful surroundings. I grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk and made my way up the creaky wooden steps to the front porch. The key from the rental agency slid easily into the lock, and I pushed open the door, eager to settle in for a quiet evening. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a mixture of cedar and something cooking. Odd, I thought. I wasn't expecting the place to be so lived in. As I stepped into the main room, my heart nearly stopped. A man was sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, a book in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. He looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from surprise to anger in an instant. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, rising to his feet. I stumbled backward, my bag slipping from my shoulder and hitting the floor with a thud. I'm Rachel," I stammered. "I rented this place for the weekend." "Who are you?" The man's eyes narrowed. "This is my house. I don't know what you're talking about, but you need to leave. Now." My mind raced. There had to be some mistake. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, pulling up the rental confirmation email. "Look," I said, holding out the screen. "I booked this place through Lake Escape Rentals. I have the reservation right here." He didn't even glance at my phone. "I don't care what that says. This is my home. I've lived here for years. You're trespassing, and if you don't leave, I'll call the police." A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I took a step back, my hand reaching for the doorknob behind me. Okay. There's clearly been a mix-up. I'll just go and sort this out with the rental agency. As I turned to leave, I heard his footsteps approaching. Before I could react, his hand slammed against the door, keeping it shut. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck as he leaned in close. "I don't think so," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You've seen too much. Can't have you running off to tell anyone about me being here." My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face him. Up close, I could see the wild look in his eyes, the unkempt beard, the dirt under his fingernails. This man hadn't just been living here. He'd been hiding. "Please," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I won't tell anyone. Just let me go." He shook his head, a humorless smile spreading across his face. "Oh, Rachel, you're not going anywhere." The next few hours were a blur of fear and desperation. He took my phone, smashing it against the stone fireplace. I watched helplessly as the screen shattered, taking with it any hope of calling for help. He bound my hands with duct tape and shoved me into a small bedroom, locking the door behind him. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. How could this have happened? I'd been so careful in planning this trip, choosing a reputable rental agency, making sure someone knew where I was going. But as the hours ticked by, I realized that my isolation, the very thing I'd been seeking, was now my biggest danger. Through the thin walls, I could hear him moving around the cabin, muttering to himself. Occasionally, he'd approach the door, and I'd hold my breath, praying he wouldn't come in. But he always moved on, his footsteps fading away again. As night fell, the cabin grew dark. I fumbled in the darkness, my bound hands making every movement difficult. I managed to work the window open a crack, letting in a cool breeze and the sound of lapping waves from the lake. It was so peaceful outside, such a stark contrast to the terror I felt inside. I don't know how long I sat there, straining my ears for any sound of approach, my eyes scanning the dark room for anything I could use as a weapon. The moon rose high in the sky, casting long shadows through the window. Suddenly, I heard a car engine in the distance. My heart leapt. Could it be someone coming to check on the cabin? I rushed to the window, pressing my face against the cool glass. Through the trees, I could see headlights approaching. Hope surged through me, and I began to bang on the window, screaming as loud as I could. "Help! Help me! Please!" The car slowed as it neared the cabin, and I redoubled my efforts. "I'm in here! Please, help!" I heard the man's heavy footsteps pounding down the hall. The bedroom door flew open, and he was on me in an instant, one hand clamping down over my mouth, the other pulling me away from the window. "Shut up!" he hissed in my ear. "If you make another sound, I swear I'll kill you." We stood there in tense silence, his arm like an iron bar across my chest. As the car pulled up outside, I could hear doors opening and closing, voices calling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Tears streamed down my face as I listened to my potential rescuers. They were so close, just on the other side of the wall. The man's grip on me tightened as the footsteps approached the front door. A knock echoed through the cabin. "Lake Escape Rentals. We got a call about a missed check-in. Everything okay in there?" I wanted to scream, to let them know I was here, but the cold press of metal against my temple froze the words in my throat. The man had produced a gun from somewhere, and the message was clear: make a sound, and it would be my last. We stood there, barely breathing, as the rental agency employees called out a few more times. After what felt like an eternity, I heard them retreating, their voices fading as they got back in their car and drove away. As the sound of the engine disappeared into the distance, the man relaxed his grip slightly. "Good girl," he murmured, lowering the gun. "See what happens when you cooperate." He led me back to the bed, pushing me down onto it. "Now, we're going to have to move. Can't stay here now that they know something's up." He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. "We'll leave at first light. Try to get some sleep. We've got a long day ahead of us tomorrow." With that, he left, locking the door behind him once more. I curled up on the bed, my body shaking with silent sobs. My one chance at rescue had come and gone, and now I was facing an uncertain future with this unstable man. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion set in. Despite my fear, I found myself drifting off. My dreams filled with nightmarish visions of endless forests and a man with wild eyes always just a step behind me. I awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside. For a moment, I forgot where I was, stretching contentedly in the soft morning light. Then reality came crashing back, and I sat up with a gasp. The man was there, standing in the doorway. He'd changed clothes and looked more put together than he had the night before. If I'd passed him on the street, I might have thought he was just another summer vacationer. "Time to go," he said, tossing a backpack onto the bed. "Put these on." He handed me a bundle of clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, and a light jacket. I looked at my bound hands, then back at him. How am I supposed to change? He sighed, producing a knife from his pocket. My breath caught in my throat as he approached, but he merely cut the duct tape from my wrists. "Don't get any ideas," he warned. "I'll be right outside the door. You've got 5 minutes." As soon as the door closed behind him, I sprang into action. I changed quickly, my mind racing. This could be my only chance. The window was still cracked open from the night before. If I could just squeeze through. I had one leg out the window when the door burst open. The man's face contorted with rage as he lunged for me. I pushed off hard, tumbling out the window and hitting the ground with a painful thud. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the burning in my palms and knees, and took off running towards the lake. I could hear him behind me, crashing through the underbrush, but I didn't dare look back. The dock loomed ahead, and I sprinted towards it. There was a small motorboat tied up at the end, my last hope for escape. I reached the boat just as I heard his footsteps pounding down the wooden planks. My hands shook as I fumbled with the rope, finally managing to untie it. I jumped into the boat, nearly falling into the water in my haste. The motor sputtered to life just as the man reached the end of the dock. Our eyes met for a brief moment. I saw fury there, but also something else. Fear. He knew his game was up. I gunned the engine, the boat leaping forward across the glassy surface of the lake. I didn't slow down until the cabin was just a tiny speck on the shoreline behind me. As the adrenaline faded, I began to shake uncontrollably. Tears streamed down my face. Tears of relief, of fear, of disbelief at what I'd just been through. I steered the boat towards the far shore, where I could see houses and docks dotting the coastline. As I approached, I saw people pointing, a man already running down to the water's edge to help me dock. My legs nearly gave out as I stepped onto solid ground. Strong hands steadied me, concerned voices asking if I was all right. Through my tears, I managed to choke out, "Call the police, please." As I sat wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching police cars speed off towards the cabin across the lake, I couldn't help but think about how quickly a dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. The lake house that was supposed to be my sanctuary had nearly become my tomb. I knew the road ahead would be long, police interviews, probably therapy to deal with the trauma. But as I looked out over the peaceful lake, the morning sun sparkling on its surface, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had faced my worst fear and survived. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. The lake house was supposed to be my escape from the world. Instead, it taught me the most valuable lesson of all. There's no escape from the darkness that lurks in some people's hearts. All we can do is face it head on and fight like hell to survive. The trail ahead was supposed to lead me to serenity. Instead, it guided me straight into the jaws of fear. I'd always been a solitary hiker, finding peace in the quiet rustling of leaves and the rhythm of my own footsteps. This particular trail in the Cascade Mountains was a favorite of mine, winding through dense forests and offering breathtaking views of snow-capped peaks. I set out early that morning, the cool air nipping at my cheeks as I shouldered my pack and began the ascent. The first few hours were blissful. I fell into an easy rhythm, my boots crunching on the gravelly path, my breath coming in steady puffs as I climbed higher. The forest around me was alive with the sounds of birds and small creatures scurrying through the underbrush. I stopped occasionally to take in the view, marveling at how small the world below seemed. It was just past noon when I first saw him. I'd paused to refill my water bottle at a small stream when movement caught my eye. A man emerged from the trees about 50 yards ahead, his gait unsteady as he made his way towards me. Even from a distance, I could see that something wasn't quite right. His clothes were torn and dirty, his hair a wild tangle, and he seemed to be limping slightly. My first instinct was concern. Had he fallen? Was he lost? I waved, calling out, "Hey there! You okay?" He looked up, seeming to notice me for the first time. Relief washed over his face as he quickened his pace. "Oh, thank God," he called back, his voice hoarse. I thought I was alone out here. As he drew closer, the knot in my stomach tightened. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around nervously, and there was a feverish sheen to his skin. He was older than I'd first thought, probably in his late 40s, with several days' worth of stubble on his chin. "I'm Jim," he said, extending a grimy hand. I shook it hesitantly, noticing the dirt caked under his fingernails. "I've been lost out here for days. Got separated from my group and couldn't find my way back to the trail." "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the unease growing inside me. "Do you need some water? Food?" He nodded eagerly, and I handed him my water bottle, watching as he gulped it down greedily. As he drank, I took in more details. The fresh scratches on his arms, the way his hands shook slightly, the odd bulge in his jacket pocket that could have been a weapon. "The main trail is just back that way," I said, pointing down the path I'd come from. "If you head down, you should reach the ranger station in a few hours." Jim wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes never leaving my face. "Actually," he said, his tone changing slightly, "I was hoping you might help me find my way back to my campsite. I think it's up ahead a bit, and I'm not sure I can make it on my own." Warning bells went off in my head. Everything I knew about hiking safety told me not to go off trail with a stranger, especially one who seemed as unstable as Jim. But as I looked at his pleading face, I felt a pang of guilt. What if he really was in trouble? "I don't know," I said hesitantly. "I'm not really familiar with the area off trail. Maybe we should both head down to the ranger station." His expression darkened for a moment before he forced a smile. "Please," he said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "It's not far, I promise. I just need to get my gear, and then we can both head down together." Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding. "All right," I said, "but not too far, and we need to be quick about it." Relief flooded his face, and he clasped my shoulder with a grip that was a little too tight to be friendly. "Thank you," he said. "You won't regret this." As we set off, leaving the safety of the marked trail behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. Jim led the way, moving with more sureness than I would have expected from someone who claimed to be lost. He kept up a steady stream of chatter, telling me about his supposed hiking group and how they'd gotten separated. But the more he talked, the more things didn't add up. He mentioned using equipment that no experienced hiker would bring on a day trip. He described landmarks I knew weren't in the area, and every time I tried to steer the conversation back to heading down the mountain, he'd find some reason to press on just a little further. We'd been walking for about 30 minutes when I decided I'd had enough. The forest had grown denser, the light dimming as the trees closed in around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, though whether by animals or something else, I couldn't say. "Look, Jim," I said, coming to a stop. "I think we should turn back. It's getting late, and I'm not comfortable going any further off trail." He turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my blood run cold. The friendly mask had slipped, revealing something hard and dangerous underneath. "We're not going back," he said, his voice low and menacing. "We're going to keep walking until I say we stop. Understand?" My heart began to race as the full gravity of my situation hit me. I was alone in the wilderness with a man who clearly meant me harm. I took a step back, my hand instinctively going to the small canister of bear spray on my belt. "I'm leaving," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Don't try to stop me." He lunged forward with surprising speed, his hand shooting out to grab my arm. I yanked back, stumbling over a root and nearly falling. In that moment of imbalance, he was on me, his weight bearing me to the ground. We grappled in the dirt and leaves, my panic giving me strength I didn't know I had. I managed to get a knee up between us, pushing him back just enough to fumble for my bear spray. As he reared back for another attack, I brought the canister up and squeezed the trigger. The spray hit him full in the face, and he reeled back with a howl of pain, clutching at his eyes. I scrambled to my feet, gasping for breath, leaves and twigs clinging to my clothes. "You bitch!" he screamed, his voice raw with rage and agony. "I'll kill you for that." I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't slow down. I could hear him behind me, cursing and stumbling, but still in pursuit. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The forest all looked the same, endless trees stretching in every direction. I had no idea where the trail was, where the ranger station was, where anything was. For all I knew, I was running deeper into the wilderness, further from any hope of rescue. As I paused to catch my breath, leaning against a massive Douglas fir, I strained my ears for any sound of pursuit. The forest was eerily quiet, no birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then I heard it, a twig snapping somewhere to my left. I held my breath, pressing myself against the rough bark of the tree. Another snap. Closer this time, he was still out there, still hunting me. I eased around the tree, trying to stay as quiet as possible. There was a small ravine nearby, and I made for it, hoping the steep sides would offer some cover. As I slid down the embankment, loose rocks skittered away from my feet, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness of the forest. "I can hear you," Jim's voice called out, far too close for comfort. "You can't hide from me. I know these woods better than you ever will." I crouched at the bottom of the ravine, my mind racing. I couldn't keep running blindly. I'd only get myself more lost, or worse, injure myself and be unable to escape at all. I needed a plan. My pack. I still had my pack with me, and in it, my emergency kit. With shaking hands, I pulled out the small mirror and whistle. The mirror wouldn't do much good under the dense canopy, but the whistle, that might be my salvation. Taking a deep breath, I put the whistle to my lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for help in the backcountry. The sound pierced the air, echoing off the ravine walls. "No!" Jim's enraged shout came from somewhere above me. I heard him crashing through the brush, no longer trying for stealth. I blew the whistle again, scrambling along the bottom of the ravine. 3 more blasts, then a pause to listen. Was that an answering call in the distance, or just my desperate imagination? Suddenly, Jim appeared at the top of the ravine, his face a mask of fury and desperation. The bear spray had left angry red welts around his eyes, which only added to his crazed appearance. "You're going to pay for this," he snarled, starting to make his way down the steep incline. I turned to run, but my foot caught on a root, sending me sprawling face first into the rocky ground. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand. I'd twisted it badly in the fall. Jim's laughter echoed off the ravine walls as he saw me struggling. "Nowhere left to run, little rabbit," he called out, his voice dripping with malice. I dragged myself to my feet, limping badly but refusing to give up. As he drew closer, I raised the whistle to my lips once more, blowing with all my might. And then, like an answer to a prayer, I heard it, voices calling out, and the baying of dogs. The search and rescue team must have already been in the area, perhaps looking for other lost hikers. Jim heard it too. His eyes widened with fear, darting around like a cornered animal. For a moment, I thought he might still come for me, driven by rage and desperation, but self-preservation won out. With one last hateful glare in my direction, he turned and scrambled back up the ravine, disappearing into the forest. I sank to the ground, relief washing over me in waves. I blew the whistle again, and this time I was sure they were getting closer. It wasn't long before I saw the bright orange vests of the rescue team coming into view. As they helped me out of the ravine, checking my injuries and radioing for support, I couldn't stop shaking. The reality of how close I'd come to disaster hit me full force. In the days that followed, as I gave statements to the police and park rangers, I learned the truth about Jim. He was a fugitive, wanted for a string of violent crimes in nearby towns. They found his hideout deep in the woods, a crude shelter filled with stolen supplies and evidence of other victims who hadn't been as lucky as me. As I sat in the ranger station, a warm blanket around my shoulders and a cup of coffee in my hands, I couldn't help but think about how quickly a peaceful hike had turned into a fight for survival. The wilderness I loved had shown me its darker side, a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, danger can lurk just out of sight. I knew it would be a long time before I felt comfortable hiking alone again, but I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever realized. I had faced my worst fear on that mountain and come out alive. Whatever trails lay ahead, I would face them with a new respect for the wild and for my own capacity to survive. The moment I stepped into that sprawling mansion, I knew something was off. But I never imagined that a simple babysitting gig would turn into a night of heart-pounding terror. It was supposed to be an easy job. The Thompsons were well known in our small town, wealthy, respected, and always in need of a reliable babysitter for their 5-year-old son, Oliver. When Mrs. Thompson called me that afternoon, practically begging me to cover for their regular sitter who had fallen ill, I couldn't say no. The promise of double my usual rate didn't hurt either. I arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Mr. Thompson answered the door, his tuxedo crisp and perfect for the charity gala they were attending. "Emma, thank goodness you're here," he said, ushering me inside. The foyer was massive, all marble and gleaming wood. I felt underdressed in my jeans and sweater. Mrs. Thompson clacked down the grand staircase in stilettos that probably cost more than my car. "Oliver's already asleep," she said, applying a final coat of lipstick. "He shouldn't wake up, but you know where his room is if he needs anything." I nodded, having babysat for them a few times before, but something in her tone made me pause. She seemed nervous. It was hard to tell with her Botoxed features. "One more thing," Mr. Thompson said, leading me to a sleek tablet mounted on the wall in the living room. "We've upgraded our security system. You can monitor all the cameras from here." I blinked in surprise. "Cameras? I don't remember there being cameras before." Mrs. Thompson laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, you know how it is these days. Can't be too careful. Just keep an eye on things, will you? We'll feel so much better knowing you're watching." Before I could ask any more questions, they were out the door in a flurry of expensive perfume and final instructions. The house fell silent, save for the faint hum of the high-tech security system. I wandered into the kitchen, helping myself to a soda from the fridge. The tablet on the wall caught my eye. Its screen divided into a grid showing various areas of the house. Most were dark and still: the backyard, the driveway, the upstairs hallway. But one made me pause. It showed Oliver's room, the little boy fast asleep in his race car bed. Something about watching him sleep made me uneasy. It felt invasive, wrong somehow. I was about to turn away when I noticed a shadow move across the bottom of the screen. My heart skipped a beat. I leaned in closer, squinting at the grainy night vision footage. There it was again, a dark shape, just at the edge of the frame. It could have been nothing. A trick of the light, maybe. But as I watched, the shadow seemed to grow, stretching across the floor towards Oliver's bed. I bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. My palm was slick with sweat as I grasped the doorknob to Oliver's room, easing it open as quietly as I could. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nightlight. Oliver was exactly where he should be, his chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. I scanned the room, my eyes straining in the dim light. Nothing seemed out of place. Feeling foolish, I crept back downstairs. It must have been my imagination, fueled by the weirdness of watching security cameras in a house I thought I knew. I settled onto the plush sofa, pulling out my phone to distract myself with some mindless scrolling. An hour passed uneventfully. I checked on Oliver once more in person, finding him still sound asleep. But as I made my way back downstairs, a movement on one of the exterior cameras caught my eye. A figure was moving across the back patio, keeping to the shadows. My pulse quickened. Was it Mr. or Mrs. Thompson, home early from their event? But no, this person was dressed all in black, their movements furtive and purposeful. I fumbled for my phone, ready to call 911 when the figure suddenly looked directly at the camera. A chill ran down my spine. They were wearing a mask, featureless and white, like something out of a horror movie. The masked person raised a hand, pointing directly at the camera. Then, with deliberate slowness, they dragged a finger across their throat in a slashing motion. The screen went black. Panic surged through me. I jabbed at the tablet, trying to bring the cameras back online, but nothing happened. The whole system was down. A creak from upstairs made me freeze. Straining my ears, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, too heavy to be Oliver's. My mind raced. I needed to get to Oliver, to get us both out of the house. But what if the intruder was already up there? What if there was more than one? I crept towards the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The house felt different now, the shadows deeper, every corner a potential hiding place for unseen threats. Halfway up the stairs, I heard a door open. Oliver's frightened voice drifted down the hallway. "Hello? Mommy?" "Oliver!" I called out, abandoning stealth for speed. I raced up the remaining steps, rounding the corner to his room. The door was open, spilling light into the dark hallway. Oliver stood there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Emma?" I had a bad dream. Relief flooded through me. I scooped him up, holding him close. "It's okay, buddy. We need to go downstairs now, okay?" Very quietly. He nodded against my shoulder, still half asleep. I turned to head back to the stairs and froze. The masked figure stood at the end of the hallway, silent and motionless. Oliver, sensing my fear, began to whimper. I clutched him tighter, my mind spinning. There was no way past the intruder to the stairs. The only other exit was... I spun on my heel and ran for the master bedroom. I knew it had a balcony. If I could just get out there, maybe I could call for help or find a way down. I slammed the door behind us, fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy us a few precious seconds. I set Oliver down, rushing to the French doors that led to the balcony. They were locked. "No, no, no," I muttered, yanking at the handle uselessly. Outside, I could see the neighbors' houses, warm light spilling from their windows, so close, yet impossibly far away. A heavy thud against the bedroom door made me jump. Oliver started to cry in earnest now, and I scooped him up again, looking wildly around the room for anything I could use as a weapon. The thuds grew louder, the door shuddering in its frame. It wouldn't hold much longer. I backed up against the balcony doors, shielding Oliver with my body. My free hand closed around a heavy crystal vase on a nearby table. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. The masked figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. In their hand was a wickedly sharp knife, the blade catching the light as they stepped into the room. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Don't hurt him. Take whatever you want. Just let us go." The figure tilted their head, regarding us silently. Then, to my utter shock, they reached up and pulled off the mask. It was Mrs. Thompson. "Mrs. Thompson," I stammered, unable to process what I was seeing. "What's going on?" She smiled, but it wasn't the polite society smile I was used to seeing. This was something feral, unhinged. "Oh, Emma," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You've done so well. Better than we could have hoped. Really." "Mommy?" Oliver whimpered, burying his face in my neck. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my mind reeling. "Why are you doing this?" She laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "It's quite simple, dear. We needed to test our new security system, and what better way than with a real intruder?" She gestured with the knife towards the hallway. "Richard, darling, you can come out now. I think we've scared the poor girl enough." Mr. Thompson appeared in the doorway, looking slightly sheepish but no less menacing. "You have to understand, Emma," he said, his tone maddeningly reasonable. "In our position, we need to know our family is protected. We had to be sure the system worked, that our sitter would react appropriately in a crisis." I stared at them, slack-jawed with disbelief. You did all this as a test. Do you have any idea how terrified I was? How scared Oliver is?" Mrs. Thompson waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, he'll be fine. Children are resilient. And you passed with flying colors. We'll be doubling your rate from now on, of course. Can't put a price on peace of mind, after all." I looked down at Oliver, still clinging to me and sniffling softly. Then back at his parents, standing there so casually after putting us through hell. In that moment, something inside me snapped. "Keep your money," I spat, setting Oliver down gently. I quit, and I'm calling the police and child services the second I leave this house. What you did, it's not just wrong, it's criminal. Their smug expressions faltered. Mr. Thompson stepped forward, his hands raised placatingly. Now, Emma, let's not be hasty. We can work this out. I sidestepped them both, scooping Oliver back up as I headed for the door. Don't come near me, I warned, surprised by the steel in my own voice. We're leaving. Now. They didn't try to stop me as I made my way downstairs and out the front door. As soon as I hit the driveway, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. Sitting on the curb, holding a quietly weeping Oliver, I watched as police cars and an ambulance pulled up, their lights painting the perfect facade of the Thompson house in harsh reds and blues. I gave my statement in a daze, still unable to fully process what had happened. As they led Mr. and Mrs. Thompson away in handcuffs, I caught Mrs. Thompson's eye. The mask of polite society was back in place, but now I could see the cracks, the darkness lurking just beneath the surface. I hugged Oliver closer, vowing silently that I would do whatever it took to make sure he was safe. Truly safe. From now on. The night had started as a simple babysitting job, but it had turned into something much more. A stark reminder that sometimes the real monsters wear designer clothes and live in mansions. As I watched the police cars drive away, I knew that my life and Oliver's would never be the same. But we had survived, and in the face of true terror, we had found strength we never knew we had. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The wilderness was supposed to be my escape. Instead, it became my prison, with an unseen jailer stalking my every move. I've always been an avid camper, finding solace in the quiet of the forest and the challenge of surviving with just the basics. This trip was meant to be no different, a week-long solo excursion into the heart of the Ozarks, miles from the nearest hint of civilization. I'd done my research, packed my gear meticulously, and set out with a spring in my step and adventure in my heart. The first few days were blissful. I hiked deep into the backcountry, setting up camp in a small clearing near a babbling brook. The weather was perfect, cool nights and warm, sunny days. I spent my time exploring the surrounding area, identifying plants, and even managed to catch a few trout for dinner. As I sat by my campfire each evening, watching the stars emerge in the velvety sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. I woke suddenly in the pre-dawn darkness, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't immediately identify. As I lay there in my tent, straining my ears, I realized what had pulled me from sleep. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, circling my campsite. My first thought was that it must be an animal, a deer perhaps, or even a black bear curious about the lingering scent of my dinner. But as I listened, the rhythm seemed too regular, too deliberate to be anything but human. I held my breath, hoping that whoever it was would move on. The footsteps completed a circuit around my tent, and then, to my horror, I heard the zipper of my backpack being slowly opened. Adrenaline surged through me. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking as I flicked it on and unzipped my tent in one swift motion. The beam of light swept across my empty campsite. My backpack lay where I'd left it, but the top flap was open, contents slightly disturbed. Of the nighttime visitor, there was no sign. I scrambled out of the tent, my bare feet cold against the dewy grass. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared in the vast darkness. "Is someone there?" Only the quiet sounds of the forest answered me. I spent the rest of the night sitting up, flashlight in one hand and my hunting knife in the other, jumping at every snapping twig and rustle of leaves. As the sky began to lighten with the approaching dawn, I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. Surely, I thought, it had just been my imagination running wild in the dark. But as I stepped out of my tent that morning, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the soft earth around my campsite, were footprints, human footprints, circling my tent just as I'd heard in the night. My hands trembled as I knelt to examine them. They were large, a man's size, I guessed, and deep, as if the person had been carrying something heavy, and they led off into the forest, in the direction I'd planned to hike that day. I stood there for a long moment, torn between the urge to pack up and flee and a stubborn determination not to let fear ruin my trip. In the end, pride won out. I was an experienced outdoorsman, I told myself. I had my wits, my gear, and my knife. I could handle this. So I stayed. But I also set traps, nothing lethal, just simple snares that would alert me if anyone approached the camp. I repositioned my tent, making sure I had a clear view in all directions, and I kept my knife close at hand, even as I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. The day passed uneventfully. I hiked. I fished. I even managed to relax a little as the warm sun and peaceful forest worked their magic. But as night fell, the unease returned, settling in my stomach like a lead weight. I lay in my tent, fully clothed, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Every rustle, every snap of a twig had me on high alert. But the night passed without incident, and I began to hope that perhaps the previous night had been a one-time occurrence. That hope was shattered the next morning. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the cool dawn air, stretching my stiff muscles, and then I saw it. There, hanging from a low branch of a nearby tree, was a small doll. It was old and dirty, its once bright dress now a dingy gray, its plastic face scratched and weathered. I approached it slowly, my skin crawling. It hadn't been there the night before. I was certain of that. As I got closer, I saw that it was hanging by a crude noose fashioned from what looked like fishing line. I stared at it, my mind racing. This was no coincidence, no product of an overactive imagination. Someone was out there, watching me, playing some kind of sick game. With shaking hands, I cut the doll down and stuffed it into my pack. I couldn't bear to leave it hanging there, a macabre reminder of my unseen tormentor. As I turned back to my campsite, planning to pack up and get the hell out of there, I noticed something else. My snares had been triggered, but not by any animal. They'd been deliberately sprung, the twine cut cleanly as if by a knife. Panic rose in my throat. Whoever was out there, they'd been in my camp again while I slept, close enough to touch my tent, and I'd slept through it all. I threw my gear into my backpack haphazardly, no longer caring about neatness or organization. Every rustle of the leaves, every bird call made me flinch. I kept expecting to see a figure emerge from the trees, that awful doll clutched in its hands. Just as I was about to shoulder my pack and flee, I heard it. A whistle, low and melodious, coming from the trees to my left. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The whistle came again, closer this time, and then a voice, rough and deep. Leaving so soon, but we've only just started to play. I ran. I didn't even think about it, didn't pause to grab my map or compass. I just ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face and arms. I could hear laughter behind me and the sound of someone giving chase. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I had no idea where I was, how far I'd come, or in what direction. The trees all looked the same, an endless maze of green and brown. But I didn't dare stop, didn't dare look back. As I burst through a thick stand of pines, I saw it, a small cave, half hidden by a tumble of rocks. Without hesitation, I dove inside, pressing myself against the cold, damp stone. I don't know how long I stayed there, hardly daring to breathe. The sound of pursuit faded, but still I waited, terrified that at any moment a hand would reach into the cave and drag me out. Hours passed. The light outside the cave entrance dimmed as evening approached. My muscles ached from holding still for so long, and thirst clawed at my throat. But still I didn't move. It wasn't until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky that I finally gathered the courage to peer out of my hiding place. The forest was quiet, peaceful even, no sign of my pursuer. Slowly, painfully, I crawled out of the cave. I was lost, weaponless, with no food or water, but I was alive and free. For now. I picked a direction at random and started walking, knowing that eventually I had to hit a trail, a road, something. I walked through the night, jumping at shadows, certain that at any moment I'd hear that chilling whistle again. It was near dawn when I finally stumbled onto a hiking trail. I could have wept with relief. I followed it, my feet bloody and blistered, my clothes torn, until I reached a ranger station. The rangers were alarmed by my appearance and my wild tale. They called in a search team, but they found nothing. No campsite, no doll, no mysterious footprints. Just the untouched wilderness. As I sat in the ranger station, wrapped in a blanket and sipping hot coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. That somewhere out there in the vast forest, someone was watching, waiting, ready to start the game again. I never went camping alone again after that. The peace I once found in solitude had been shattered, replaced by a constant, nagging fear. Every time I step into the woods now, I find myself looking over my shoulder, straining my ears for the sound of footsteps or a distant whistle. The wilderness was supposed to be my escape, my sanctuary. But now I know the truth. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones that walk on two legs, leaving behind nothing but fear and a battered old doll as proof of their passing. I never thought a simple act of kindness could lead me down such a dark and terrifying path. But on that rainy night, as I extended my hand to a stranger, I unknowingly invited danger into my life. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, squeaking rhythmically as they swept across the glass. I squinted through the haze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. It was well past midnight, and the rural highway stretched endlessly before me, empty save for the occasional glare of a passing truck's headlights. I was exhausted, having driven for hours after a long day at work. The monotony of the road and the hypnotic patter of rain were making it hard to keep my eyes open. I was considering pulling over at the next rest stop when I saw him. A lone figure stood at the roadside, thumb extended, barely visible in the gloom. My first instinct was to drive past. Picking up hitchhikers was dangerous. Everyone knew that. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was hunched against the rain, looking small and vulnerable. Or maybe it was just my own weariness, making me long for some company to help keep me awake. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling over, the car's tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. The man jogged towards me, hunched against the rain. As he reached for the door handle, I caught a glimpse of his face in the glow of the dashboard lights. Young, probably mid-20s, with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. "Thanks, man," he said, as he slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of wet clothes and cigarette smoke. "I've been out here for hours." "No problem," I replied, pulling back onto the empty highway. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a ways," he said vaguely, running a hand through his wet hair. "Name's Jake, by the way." "Tim," I offered, glancing at him sidelong. Now that he was in the car, I was starting to second-guess my decision. There was something off about him, a nervous energy that set me on edge. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the steady thrum of the engine and the rain on the roof. I was about to ask Jake for more specifics about his destination when he spoke up. "Mind if we take a little detour?" he asked, his voice casual but with an undercurrent of tension. "I need to pick something up from a friend's place. It's not far off the highway." I hesitated. It was late, and I was tired. The last thing I wanted was to go even more out of my way. But Jake was looking at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "I don't know, man," I said slowly. "I'm pretty beat. I was hoping to get to the next town and find a motel soon." Jake's demeanor changed instantly. The friendly facade dropped away, replaced by something hard and dangerous. "That wasn't really a request," he said, his voice low and menacing. My blood ran cold as I saw him reach into his jacket pocket. The gleam of metal caught my eye. A knife, its blade catching the dim light from the dashboard. "Keep driving," Jake ordered, the knife now held loosely in his lap, a clear threat. "And take the next right turn." My mind raced as I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. How had I been so stupid? I should have trusted my instincts and driven past. Now I was trapped in a metal box, hurtling down a dark highway with a madman. I took the turn as instructed, the car now bumping down a narrow country road. The rain seemed to intensify, sheets of water slamming against the windshield. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake ignored the question. "Pull over up there," he said instead, pointing to a gap in the trees ahead. As we came to a stop, the headlights illuminated a dilapidated barn, its weathered boards gray in the rain. My heart sank. We were miles from anywhere, with no hope of anyone coming to my aid. "Get out," Jake commanded, gesturing with the knife. I complied, stepping out into the downpour. Jake followed, keeping the knife trained on me as he marched me towards the barn. The old door creaked ominously as he shoved it open. The interior was dark and musty, filled with shadows that seemed to move in the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Jake fumbled for a moment before finding an old lantern, its weak flame casting a sickly yellow glow around us. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to a rickety chair in the corner. As I sank into it, my mind whirled, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. Jake paced back and forth, muttering to himself. I caught fragments of his ramblings, something about being followed, about needing to lay low. With a start, I realized he was likely some kind of fugitive, on the run from the law. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but I can help. We can go to the police and explain the situation." Jake whirled on me, his eyes wild. "Shut up," he snarled. "You don't know anything. They're everywhere, watching, waiting, but I'm smarter than them. They won't catch me." I fell silent, realizing that reasoning with him was useless. He was clearly unstable, possibly delusional. I needed to find another way out. As Jake continued his agitated pacing, I subtly tested the strength of the chair. It was old, the wood soft with rot. If I could just get a moment of distraction, maybe I could break free and make a run for it. Hours crawled by. The storm outside intensified, wind howling through the gaps in the barn walls. Jake alternated between manic episodes of paranoid ranting and periods of tense silence. I remained alert, watching for any opportunity to escape. As dawn approached, I saw my chance. Jake had dozed off, slumped against the far wall, the knife loose in his grasp. Moving as quietly as I could, I stood, wincing at the creak of the chair. I had taken only 2 steps when a floorboard groaned beneath my feet. Jake's eyes snapped open, instantly alert. With a roar of rage, he lunged at me. I reacted on pure instinct, grabbing the lantern and hurling it at him. The glass shattered, spilling oil and flames across the dry, rotted wood of the barn floor. Fire spread with terrifying speed. Jake screamed, more in anger than pain, as he batted at the flames, licking at his clothes. I didn't wait to see more. I ran, coughing as acrid smoke filled my lungs. The old barn door was swollen with moisture, stuck fast. I slammed my shoulder against it once, twice, 3 times before it finally gave way with a splintering crash. I tumbled out into the pre-dawn gloom, gulping in great lungfuls of clean, rain-washed air. Behind me, I could hear Jake's shouts turning to screams of genuine terror as the fire consumed the barn. For a moment, I hesitated. Could I really leave him to die? But self-preservation won out. I ran to my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. As I peeled away, gravel spraying, I caught a final glimpse in the rearview mirror of the barn fully engulfed in flames, a pillar of fire and smoke rising into the lightening sky. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and that nightmarish scene as possible. It wasn't until the sun was high in the sky that I finally pulled over at a truck stop, my body shaking with exhaustion and delayed shock. As I sat there, staring blankly at the steering wheel, a news report on the radio caught my attention. A manhunt was underway for an escaped convict, considered armed and extremely dangerous. The description matched Jake perfectly. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by a wave of nausea. I had come so close to becoming just another victim, another statistic. The realization of what I had narrowly escaped hit me like a physical blow. In the days that followed, I wrestled with whether to go to the police. In the end, I decided against it. The barn had burned to the ground, Jake's fate unknown. There was no evidence of what had transpired, just my word against the ashes. But the experience changed me profoundly. I became more cautious, more aware of the potential dangers lurking behind even the most innocent-seeming situations. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, now filled me with unease. And on rainy nights, when I see a lone figure standing by the roadside, thumb extended, I drive past without slowing. The memory of Jake's wild eyes and the gleam of his knife are all the reminder I need that sometimes it's better to leave a stranger in the rain than to invite danger into your car. The simple act of kindness I had extended that night had nearly cost me everything. It was a lesson I would never forget, that the darkest threats often come disguised as those in need of help, and that the road to hell is sometimes paved with good intentions. The open road had always been my sanctuary, but on that endless night, it became a trap, with an unseen predator stalking me through the darkness. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional glare of passing headlights. It was late, well past midnight, and I was on the final stretch of a cross-country move. My old life was packed into boxes in the back of my SUV, and a new job waited for me 2 states over. I was tired, but wired, fueled by gas station coffee and the promise of a fresh start. The first time I noticed the truck, I didn't think much of it. Just another traveler on this lonely stretch of highway. It was an old pickup, its once white paint now a dingy gray in the moonlight. It hung back, maybe a quarter mile behind me, steady and unremarkable. An hour passed, and I realized the truck was still there. Every time I checked my rearview mirror, I saw those same headlights, maintaining that same distance. It could have been coincidence. Maybe they were headed to the same city, taking the same route. But something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I decided to test my growing suspicion. At the next exit, I signaled and pulled off the highway. The truck followed. My heart rate picked up as I navigated the empty streets of a small town, making random turns. Left, right, another right, and every time, those headlights stayed with me. This was no coincidence. I was being followed. Panic started to set in as I pulled back onto the highway. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel, and I found myself constantly glancing in the rearview mirror. The truck was still there, a menacing presence in the darkness. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just some bored local kids playing a prank, or an overzealous cop who thought I looked suspicious. But deep down, I knew it was something worse. The steady, relentless pursuit spoke of a darker purpose. I pressed down on the accelerator, pushing my speed well above the limit. The truck matched my pace effortlessly. I slowed down, and it slowed too, always maintaining that same eerie distance, close enough to see me, but not close enough for me to make out any details of the driver. My mind raced, trying to think of a plan. I could try to outrun them, but my SUV was no match for the pickup in terms of speed. I could pull over and confront them, but the thought of facing my pursuer alone on this deserted highway made my blood run cold. I fumbled for my phone, intending to call 911, but my heart sank as I saw the no service and message on the screen. Of course, I was in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. The game of cat and mouse continued for what felt like hours. Every mile marker that flew by was a reminder of how alone I was, how far from help. The fuel gauge was dipping dangerously low, and I knew I'd have to stop soon. The thought filled me with dread. What would happen when I couldn't run anymore? Just as despair was starting to overwhelm me, I saw a glimmer of hope, a sign for a rest area coming up in 2 miles. My heart leapt. Surely there would be other people there, maybe even a night attendant or security guard. Safety in numbers. I took the exit, relief flooding through me as I saw the lights of the rest area ahead. But as I pulled into the parking lot, my hope turned to ash. The place was deserted. No other cars, no lights on in the main building. Just empty parking spaces and shadows. I parked under the harsh glare of a floodlight, killing the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, watching for the truck. For a long moment, nothing happened. Had I lost them? Had this all been in my imagination? Then I saw it. The truck rolled slowly into the parking lot, its engine a low growl in the stillness of the night. It circled around, coming to a stop directly behind me, blocking my exit. I sat frozen, my breath coming in short gasps. This was it. Whatever sick game my pursuer had been playing, it was about to come to an end. I watched, terrified, as the driver's door of the truck opened. A figure stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered. In the harsh light, I could see it was a man, his face hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap. He stood there for a moment, just staring at my car. Then he started walking towards me. Panic exploded in my chest. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as the man reached my driver's side window. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I slammed the car into reverse, the tires squealing as I backed up. There was a thud and a shout as my bumper connected with something. The man, the truck. I didn't know and didn't care. I shifted into drive and floored it, racing out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pushed the SUV to its limits, the speedometer climbing past 90, 100, 110. I didn't dare look back, terrified of what I might see. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to slow down, that I was going to get myself killed. But the fear was stronger, driving me forward into the night. It wasn't until I saw the flashing lights in my rearview mirror that I finally eased off the gas. For a moment, terror gripped me. Had the truck caught up? But no, this was different. Red and blue lights. The distinctive shape of a police cruiser. I pulled over, my whole body shaking. As the officer approached my window, I burst into tears, the stress and fear of the night finally overwhelming me. The next few hours passed in a blur. I told my story to the skeptical officer, then again to his sergeant. They found no sign of the truck, no evidence of the pursuit I'd endured. In the harsh light of day, it all seemed absurd, like a bad dream. But I knew what I had experienced. The terror had been real, the danger palpable. As I finally pulled away from the police station, continuing my journey with an escort for the first few miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Every truck I passed made my heart race. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror sent a chill down my spine. The open road, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, now felt like a hunting ground. I made it to my destination eventually, physically unharmed but forever changed. I installed extra locks on my new apartment door, bought a can of pepper spray to keep in my car. I avoided driving at night whenever possible, and never on lonely highways. Months passed, and the intensity of the fear began to fade. But I never forgot, and sometimes, on dark nights when I can't sleep, I find myself wondering about the truck and its driver. Who were they? What did they want? And most chillingly, are they still out there, cruising the highways, looking for their next victim? The rational part of my mind tells me it's over, that I'm safe now. But another part, the part that remembers the terror of that endless night, knows better. Because the truth is, you're never really safe on the open road. There are predators out there, patient and relentless, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. So if you're ever driving late at night and you notice a vehicle that seems to be following you a little too closely, a little too persistently, don't ignore that uneasy feeling in your gut. It might just save your life. Because sometimes, the real monsters aren't hiding under your bed or in your closet. Sometimes, they're right behind you, their headlights steady in your rearview mirror, waiting for you to let your guard down. The open road may seem like freedom, but it can quickly become a trap. And once you're caught, there's no telling where that long, dark highway might lead you. The moment I met Sarah, I should have known. There was something in her eyes, a glint of something not quite right, but I was too caught up in the excitement of my trip, too eager for a friend in a strange city, to see the danger lurking behind her smile. I had been in Bangkok for 3 days, and the chaos of the city was starting to wear on me. The constant noise, the press of bodies in the streets, the overwhelming assault on all my senses. It was exhilarating, but exhausting. When I stumbled into the common room of my cheap hostel that evening, sweaty and footsore from a day of sightseeing, all I wanted was a cold drink and a quiet corner to decompress. That's when Sarah appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, a cold beer in each hand and a wide grin on her face. "You look like you could use this," she said, holding out one of the bottles. Her Australian accent was thick, but friendly. I accepted the beer gratefully, and soon we were chatting like old friends. Sarah had been traveling through Southeast Asia for months, and she was full of stories and advice. She knew all the best places, the hidden temples, the street food stalls with the most amazing pad thai, the bars where the locals went to escape the tourist crowds. "You know," she said, leaning in conspiratorially after we'd been talking for hours. "There's this amazing night market not far from here. It's off the beaten path, not in any of the guidebooks. The food is incredible, and they have the most unique souvenirs. Want to check it out?" I hesitated for a moment. It was getting late and I was tired, but Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and the promise of seeing a side of Bangkok that most tourists missed was too tempting to pass up. "Sure," I said, ignoring the small voice in the back of my mind that urged caution. "Let's do it." We caught a tuk-tuk, the three-wheeled taxi weaving through the crowded streets with alarming speed. I noticed we were heading away from the city center, into areas that looked less polished, more run down. But Sarah kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out interesting sights and telling me about her adventures in Vietnam, and I pushed my unease aside. Finally, the tuk-tuk dropped us off on a dimly lit street. The buildings here were older, their paint peeling and faded. A few people moved about, but it was nothing like the bustling markets I'd seen in the tourist areas. "Are you sure this is the right place?" I asked, looking around uncertainly. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "Oh yeah, it's just down this way. Come on." She led me down a narrow alley, the sounds of the main street fading behind us. The buildings pressed in close on either side, and the air felt thick and oppressive. I was about to suggest we turn back when the alley suddenly opened up into a small square. There were a few stalls set up, selling fruits and vegetables I didn't recognize. An old woman stirred a huge pot of something that smelled spicy and delicious. But it was nothing like the vibrant, crowded night markets I'd seen in my guidebook. "Let's grab a drink while we wait for things to pick up," Sarah suggested, steering me towards a small, dimly lit bar tucked into one corner of the square. The bar was nearly empty, just a couple of locals nursing beers at a table in the corner. We sat at the bar, and Sarah ordered for us in fluid Thai. The bartender, a heavy-set man with a face like weathered leather, grunted and placed 2 glasses of clear liquid in front of us. "Cheers," Sarah said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers and took a sip. The alcohol burned going down, but left a pleasant warmth in my stomach. We talked as we drank, Sarah regaling me with more stories of her travels. But as time passed, I began to feel strange. The room seemed to be swaying slightly, and my thoughts felt sluggish and confused. I glanced at my watch, surprised to see that barely half an hour had passed. It felt like we'd been sitting there for hours, I think, I think I need some air, I mumbled, struggling to form the words. My tongue felt thick in my mouth. Sarah's face swam in front of me, her smile now seeming predatory rather than friendly. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice sounding distorted and far away. "I don't think you're going anywhere." Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. The drink. It had been drugged. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The room spun wildly, and I felt myself slipping from the bar stool. Strong hands caught me before I hit the floor. Through the haze that was rapidly overtaking my vision, I saw the bartender coming around from behind the bar. He and Sarah exchanged words in Thai, their tones businesslike, as if discussing a transaction. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Sarah's face, that friendly smile now twisted into something cold and calculating. I awoke to pain and darkness. My head throbbed, my mouth was dry as sandpaper, and every muscle in my body ached. I tried to move, only to discover that my hands and feet were bound. Panic clawed at my throat as the memories came flooding back. Sarah, the bar, the drugged drink. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I could make out that I was in a small, bare room. The air was hot and stale, and I could hear muffled sounds from somewhere nearby. Traffic, maybe eyes or voices. The door creaked open, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent light. I squinted against the sudden brightness, making out two figures silhouetted in the doorway. One was Sarah, the other was a man I didn't recognize, tall and broad-shouldered with a face like a carved stone mask. "Well, well," the man said, his English heavily accented. "Our sleeping beauty awakes." Sarah hung back by the door, not meeting my eyes. The man crouched down in front of me, gripping my chin roughly and forcing me to look at him. "You've caused us quite a bit of trouble," he said. "Your embassy is asking questions. Your family has been calling the hotels. It's all very inconvenient." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt swollen and useless in my mouth. The man chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Don't worry, you won't be our problem for much longer. There are people who will pay good money for a pretty young thing like you. Maybe in a factory, maybe in a brothel. Who knows? The possibilities are endless." Cold terror washed over me as the full horror of my situation became clear. This wasn't a simple robbery. This was human trafficking, and I was the commodity being sold. The man stood, brushing off his hands as if he'd touched something distasteful. "Get her ready for transport," he said to Sarah. "The buyers will be here in an hour." As the door closed behind them, leaving me alone in the darkness once more, despair threatened to overwhelm me. How had I been so stupid? How had I fallen for Sarah's act so completely? But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion began to take hold. Determination. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I began to work at my bonds, ignoring the pain as the rough rope bit into my wrists. Time passed, minutes or hours, I couldn't tell. But finally, I felt the ropes begin to loosen. With a final, desperate effort, I managed to slip one hand free. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, I repositioned myself to hide that I'd freed my hand. The door opened, and Sarah entered alone. She wouldn't meet my eyes as she approached with a bottle of water. "You should drink," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "It's a long journey ahead." As she bent to hold the bottle to my lips, I made my move. With all the strength I could muster, I swung my freed hand, catching her square across the jaw. She stumbled backward, shock written across her face. I didn't waste a second. I lunged forward, tackling her to the ground. We grappled silently, each of us knowing that to cry out would bring the others running. Finally, my desperation won out. I managed to get my hands around her throat, squeezing until her eyes rolled back and she went limp. With shaking hands, I searched her pockets and finding a small knife. I cut my remaining bonds and crept to the door, listening intently. The hallway beyond was silent. I don't remember much of my escape. It's a blur of adrenaline and terror, creeping down hallways, ducking into shadows every time I heard a noise. Finally finding a window I could squeeze through, I ran through unfamiliar streets, ignoring the stares of passers-by, until I found a police station. The next few days were a whirlwind of questioning, embassy visits, and tearful phone calls to my family. They caught Sarah and her associates eventually. The police told me I wasn't their first victim, but I was one of the few who had managed to escape. The knowledge brought little comfort. As I boarded the plane that would take me home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left a part of myself behind in that dark room. My trust in strangers, my belief in the fundamental goodness of people, it had all been shattered. The scars from those ropes have long since faded, but the internal wounds remain. I still travel, still seek out new experiences and connections. But now there's always a part of me on guard, watching for the danger that might be lurking behind a friendly smile. Because I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who come to you with open arms and promises of adventure. The abandoned building loomed before me, a decaying monument to forgotten industry. I never imagined that my quest for the perfect photograph would lead me into a nightmare of shadows and survival. Photography had always been my escape, a way to see beauty in the overlooked and forgotten corners of the world. Urban exploration was my latest obsession, and this old factory on the outskirts of town promised to be a goldmine of haunting images. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the crumbling facade as I approached, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder. The chain-link fence surrounding the property was already breached, a ragged hole torn in the rusted metal. I slipped through easily, my heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The main entrance was boarded up, but I found a broken window around the side. Climbing through, I found myself in what must have been an old office space. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the dirty windows, and the musty smell of decay filled my nostrils. I took my time, moving carefully through the building, capturing shots of peeling paint, rusted machinery, and nature slowly reclaiming the space. The play of light and shadow was mesmerizing, and I lost track of time as I worked my way deeper into the sprawling complex. It was as I was setting up a shot in a vast, echoing room filled with silent conveyor belts that I first heard the voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, whistling through broken windows or gaps in the walls. But as I strained my ears, I could make out the low murmur of conversation. My first instinct was to call out, to let whoever it was know they weren't alone, but something held me back. The tone of the voices, though muffled, didn't sound like other urban explorers or even teenagers looking for a place to hang out. There was an edge to them, a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Quietly, I packed up my camera and crept towards the sound. It was coming from a room at the far end of the factory floor. As I got closer, I could make out snippets of conversation. Shipment coming in tonight. Gotta be careful. Cops have been sniffing around. Boss won't tolerate any more screw-ups. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was overhearing. This wasn't just some harmless trespassing. I had stumbled onto something far more dangerous. I started to back away slowly, planning to retrace my steps and get out as quickly and quietly as possible. But in my haste, I knocked into an old metal drum. It teetered for a heart-stopping moment before crashing to the floor with a sound like a gunshot in the cavernous space. The voices stopped abruptly. What was that? Check it out, now! Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of running feet. I sprinted across the factory floor, dodging around rusted equipment and piles of debris. I could see the window I'd entered through up ahead. Freedom was just yards away. But as I rounded a corner, I came face to face with a man I hadn't seen before. He was as surprised as I was, his eyes widening as he took in my camera gear. "Hey!" he shouted, reaching for me. I didn't think. I just reacted. I swung my heavy camera bag, catching him square in the face. He went down hard, and I leapt over his prone form, my lungs burning as I pushed myself harder. I tumbled through the window, feeling glass scrape against my arm as I fell to the ground outside. I scrambled to my feet, ready to make a run for it, but froze as I heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "Don't move," a voice growled behind me. Slowly I turned around. 2 men stood there, both holding pistols pointed squarely at my chest. A third was helping the man I'd hit with my bag to his feet. Blood streamed from his nose, and the look he gave me promised retribution. "Well, well," said one of the armed men, his tone casual but his eyes hard. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little spy." "I'm not a spy," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm just a photographer. I didn't mean to disturb anyone. Please, just let me go. I won't say anything." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, I don't think so. You've seen too much already. Boss will want to have a chat with you." They marched me back inside, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. They took me to a small office on the 2nd floor, pushing me roughly into a chair. One of them used zip ties to secure my hands behind my back, while another went through my camera bag. "Well, ain't you the artist?" he sneered, flipping through the images on my camera. "Got some real nice shots here. Too bad you won't be having your exhibition." The one who seemed to be in charge paced in front of me, tapping his gun against his leg thoughtfully. "So, photographer, who sent you? The cops? A rival outfit?" "Nobody sent me," I insisted. "I swear, I'm just an urban explorer. I come to places like this to take pictures. That's all. I had no idea anyone else was here." He studied me for a long moment, his eyes boring into mine. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "Maybe you are telling the truth," he said, "but that doesn't change the fact that you're a problem we need to deal with." A chill ran down my spine at his words. I opened my mouth to plead my case again, but was cut off by the sound of a phone ringing. The leader pulled out a cell phone, glancing at the screen before answering. "Yeah, boss, we've got a situation here." He walked to the far side of the room, speaking in low tones. I looked around desperately, searching for anything that might help me. The other men were distracted, arguing over something they'd found in my bag. My eyes fell on a rusty nail sticking out of the decaying windowsill next to me. Slowly, carefully, I began to work my bound hands against the nail, trying to saw through the zip tie. The plastic was thick and unyielding, but I could feel it starting to give. The leader finished his call and turned back to me, his expression grim. "Boss says we can't take any chances. We're moving out tonight, and you're coming with us. After that, well, let's just say you should hope you're a good swimmer." My heart raced as I realized what he was implying. They were going to kill me, dump my body somewhere it might never be found. With renewed desperation, I worked at the zip tie, feeling it begin to fray. Just as I felt the binding give way, there was a commotion from outside. The sound of squealing tires and shouted commands drifted up from the street. "Cops!" one of the men yelled, peering out the window. Chaos erupted in the small office. The men grabbed bags, shoving papers and what looked like bundles of cash inside. In the confusion, no one was paying attention to me. This was my chance. With a final, desperate effort, I snapped the weakened zip tie. In one fluid motion, I grabbed my camera bag and bolted for the door. Shouts followed me as I raced down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. I could hear the thunder of footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I burst out of the building, blinking in the sudden brightness. The scene outside was pandemonium. Police cars had the building surrounded. Officers crouched behind open doors with weapons drawn. I heard someone shout, "Freeze!" but I couldn't tell if they were yelling at me or the men behind me. I ran towards the police line, my hands raised. "Help!" I screamed. "They're right behind me." What followed was a blur of activity. I was tackled to the ground by an officer, handcuffed, and shoved into the back of a police car. Through the window, I watched as more police stormed the building. There were sounds of gunshots, more shouting. It wasn't until hours later, after I'd been questioned extensively and my story corroborated by the evidence found in the factory, that I was finally released. As I stood outside the police station, my camera bag returned to me and a blanket draped over my shoulders. The full weight of what had happened hit me. I had gone looking for interesting photographs and instead found myself in the middle of a police raid on a major criminal operation. I had nearly been killed, had seen things I could never unsee. As I hailed a cab to take me home, I realized that my days of urban exploration were over. The thrill of capturing forgotten places on film no longer seemed worth the risk. The abandoned factory had given me the shot of a lifetime, but it had also shown me just how dangerous the world could be. From now on, I decided I'd stick to photographing sunsets and landscapes. Sometimes, the most beautiful images are the ones that don't come with a side of mortal peril. The flash of hazard lights pierced the rainy darkness, a beacon of distress on the desolate highway. I never imagined that my instinct to help would lead me into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. It was just past midnight, and I was driving home after a long shift at the hospital. The rain had been relentless all day, turning the world outside my windshield into a blur of wet shadows and reflective surfaces. I was tired, my eyes stinging from the strain of focusing on the road, but I was only about an hour from home. Just a little further, I told myself, fighting back a yawn. That's when I saw them, the flashing hazard lights of a car pulled over on the shoulder. As I drew closer, I could make out the silhouette of someone waving their arms frantically. My exhaustion evaporated, replaced by a surge of adrenaline and concern. I'm a nurse. Helping people is ingrained in me. Without a second thought, I slowed down and pulled over, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. As I put the car in park, I could see it was a woman standing there, her clothes soaked through, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. "Are you okay?" I called out as I stepped from my car, the rain immediately drenching me. "Do you need help?" The woman's face crumpled with relief. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "My car just died, and I can't get any cell service out here. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." I approached her car, an older model sedan that had seen better days. "Pop the hood," I suggested. "I'm no mechanic, but maybe I can spot something obvious." As she reached into the car to pull the hood release, I heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. Headlights illuminated us briefly as a pickup truck slowed and pulled over behind my car. A sense of relief washed over me. More help had arrived. The truck's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a rain-slick jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "You folks having some trouble?" he called out, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Yeah," I replied, turning back to the woman's car. Her vehicle just died. I was about to take a look. I heard the man's footsteps approaching as I leaned under the hood, squinting in the dim light. Everything looked normal to my untrained eye, but then again, I wouldn't know a carburetor from a catalytic converter. Suddenly, I felt something cold and hard press against the back of my neck. My blood ran cold as I realized what it was, the barrel of a gun. "Don't move," the man's voice growled, all pretense of friendliness gone. "You make one sound and I'll blow your head off." I froze, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a nightmare, a product of my exhausted brain. But the metal digging into my skin felt all too real. "All right, nice and easy now," the man said. "Stand up slowly and turn around. Keep your hands where I can see them." I did as I was told, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. As I turned, I saw the woman standing next to the man, no longer looking distressed. In fact, she was smiling, a cold, predatory grin that sent chills down my spine. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Looks like we caught ourselves a good Samaritan. How sweet." The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. This had all been a setup. They had been waiting for someone like me to stop, someone whose kindness they could exploit. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't have much money, but you can have it all. Just let me go." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Oh, we'll take your money. Don't you worry. But that's not all we're after. You've got a nice car there, and I bet you've got some fancy medical equipment at home, don't you, nurse?" I felt a jolt of fear. How did he know I was a nurse? Then I remembered my scrubs. I was still wearing them under my jacket. "Now, here's what's going to happen," the woman said, her tone businesslike. "You're going to drive your car, and we'll follow in ours. You'll take us to your house, and you'll give us everything valuable you've got. If you try anything stupid, like signaling for help or trying to lose us, well..." She nodded at the gun still pointed at me. "I don't think I need to spell it out for you." My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. But with the gun trained on me and no other cars in sight, I knew I had no choice but to comply, at least for now. They marched me back to my car, the man keeping the gun pressed against my back. As I slid into the driver's seat, the woman leaned in close, her breath hot on my ear. "Remember, we'll be right behind you. One wrong move, and it's all over." I nodded mutely, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. As I pulled back onto the highway, I could see their headlights in my rearview mirror, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. The drive was a nightmare. Every set of headlights I saw sparked a moment of hope, quickly extinguished as they passed by, oblivious to my plight. I considered deliberately causing an accident, anything to attract attention. But the thought of the gun pointed at me kept me in line. As we neared my neighborhood, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, potentially suicidal, but it was the only chance I had. I turned onto my street, my heart racing. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, out walking his dog despite the late hour and the rain. He was an insomniac, often up at odd hours. Tonight, he might be my salvation. I parked the car and got out slowly, making sure to leave the door open. The couple pulled up behind me, the man getting out with the gun held low but still visible. "Evening, Sarah," Mr. Johnson called out, waving cheerfully. "Bit late for visitors, isn't it?" This was my chance. I took a deep breath and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Help! They have a gun!" Everything happened in a blur after that. I heard the man curse, saw him raise the gun, but before he could fire, 100 pounds of angry German shepherd slammed into him. Mr. Johnson's dog, usually so gentle, had sensed the threat and reacted instinctively. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the quiet street, but the bullet went wide. I saw the woman running back to their car, panic written across her face. Mr. Johnson was on his phone, presumably calling 911. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I ran for my front door, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the lock open. Once inside, I slammed the door shut and collapsed against it, sliding to the floor as the adrenaline drained from my body, leaving me weak and trembling. The next few hours passed in a blur of police sirens, questioning and statements. The man had been subdued by Mr. Johnson and his dog, while the woman had been caught trying to flee the scene. Both were now in custody. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the rain-soaked street, I sat on my front porch, a blanket draped over my shoulders, and a cup of untouched coffee cooling in my hands. The police had finally left, and the neighborhood was quiet once more. But I knew things would never be the same. The world felt different now, darker and more dangerous. My faith in humanity, in the simple act of helping a stranger in need, had been shaken to its core. I knew that the next time I saw someone broken down on the side of the road, I would hesitate. The thought filled me with sadness and anger. anger at the people who had done this to me, who had turned an act of kindness into a weapon. But as I sat there watching the sun slowly rise, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this experience change who I was at my core. I became a nurse to help people, and I wouldn't let fear stop me from doing that. I would be more cautious, yes, but I wouldn't stop caring, stop trying to make a difference. The rain had finally stopped, and a rainbow arched across the sky, a vibrant splash of color against the gray clouds. It felt like a sign, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, beauty and hope can still exist. I stood up, my muscles protesting after the long, stressful night. As I turned to go back inside, I saw Mr. Johnson walking towards me, his dog trotting faithfully by his side. He raised a hand in greeting, a gentle smile on his weathered face. And in that moment, I realized something important. Yes, there are dangers in this world, people who would exploit kindness for their own gain. But there are also people like Mr. Johnson, everyday heroes who step up when it matters most. For every person who would do harm, there are countless others who would help, who would put themselves at risk to save a stranger. As I waved back to Mr. Johnson, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The night's events had shaken me, but they hadn't broken me. I was still here, still standing. And as long as there were people like Mr. Johnson in the world, I knew that kindness would always win out in the end. The road ahead might be uncertain, but I was ready to face it. One step at a time, one act of kindness at a time, I would reclaim my faith in humanity. And maybe, just maybe, my story would inspire others to keep their hearts open, even in the face of fear. Because in the end, it's not the darkness that defines us, but how we choose to light the way for others. The vast expanse of the ocean had always been my sanctuary, but on that sun-drenched afternoon, it became my prison, with an unseen predator circling ever closer. I'd been planning this solo boat trip around the Florida Keys for months. As a marine biologist, I was no stranger to the water, but this was different. This was about freedom, about losing myself in the endless blue and finding something, peace maybe, or purpose. The messy breakup and the stress of my research grant falling through had left me feeling adrift. I needed this. The day started perfectly. I set out just after dawn, the air crisp and salty, full of promise. My little motorboat, the Sea Sprite, wasn't much to look at, but she was reliable. I'd packed enough supplies for a full day of exploring some of the more secluded spots around the Keys. For the first few hours, it was bliss. I found a quiet cove and spent some time snorkeling, marveling at the vibrant coral and the fish darting around my legs. Back on the boat, I stretched out on the deck, letting the sun warm my skin as I flipped through a dog-eared paperback. It was early afternoon when I first noticed the other boat, just a speck on the horizon at first, barely visible against the glare of the sun on the water. I didn't think much of it. The Keys were popular, after all. Plenty of other people out enjoying the perfect weather. But as time passed, I realized something was off. No matter which direction I went, that boat seemed to be there, always maintaining the same distance. Close enough to see, but not close enough to make out any details. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably just another day tripper, happening to follow a similar route. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, tension building in my muscles. I decided to test my theory. I changed course abruptly, heading towards a cluster of small islands I knew were mostly uninhabited. The mangroves there were thick, the channels between the islands narrow and tricky to navigate if you didn't know what you were doing. For a while, I thought I'd lost them. The twisted waterways and overhanging vegetation provided good cover, and I allowed myself to relax a little. But as I emerged from the far side of the island chain, my heart sank. There it was again, that same boat, still keeping its distance but unmistakably following my path. Fear began to set in, real and cold. This was no coincidence. Whoever was on that boat was following me, and they'd been doing it for hours. But why? What did they want? I ran through the possibilities in my mind, each one worse than the last. Pirates? Drug runners? Or something even more sinister? The Keys had a dark side. I knew. People disappeared out here sometimes, their boats found drifting and empty. I needed help. I reached for my phone, but my stomach dropped when I saw there was no signal. Of course, I'd gone too far out, too remote. I was on my own. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, trying to think through my options. I could try to outrun them, but my little boat was no match for theirs in terms of speed. I could head for the nearest populated island, but that was hours away, and the sun was already starting to dip towards the horizon. As I debated, squinting at my charts and trying to formulate a plan, a movement caught my eye. The other boat was changing course, angling directly towards me, my breath caught in my throat. This was it. Whatever game they'd been playing, it was coming to an end. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel hard, turning the Sea Sprite in a tight circle. Water sprayed over the sides as I opened up the throttle, pushing the little boat to its limits. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. I raced across the open water, my eyes darting between the path ahead and the boat behind me. They were gaining, their larger engine eating up the distance between us. Sweat trickled down my back despite the cool spray of the ocean. In desperation, I veered towards a section of reef I knew was just below the surface. It was dangerous. One wrong move and I'd tear the bottom out of my boat. But I was smaller, more maneuverable. Maybe I could lose them in the maze of coral. The Sea Sprite bounced and skidded as we hit the shallows, the bottom scraping ominously against hidden rocks. I gritted my teeth, hands white-knuckled on the wheel as I navigated by memory and instinct. Behind me, I heard a shout and the sudden cut of an engine. Had they run aground? I didn't stop to find out. I kept going, pushing deeper into the reef system, my heart pounding in time with the slap of waves against the hull. It wasn't until the sounds of pursuit had faded entirely that I finally eased off the throttle, gasping for breath. As the adrenaline began to ebb, I realized I had a new problem. In my panic, I'd lost all sense of direction. The sun was setting rapidly, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Soon it would be dark, and I was in treacherous waters with no clear way out. I killed the engine, letting the boat drift as I tried to get my bearings. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves and the distant cry of seabirds. I fumbled for my charts, but in the fading light it was hard to make sense of them. A sharp crack split the air, making me jump. For a moment I thought it was a gunshot. But no, it was the distinctive sound of a boat hull hitting coral. They were still out there, still hunting me. Fear gave way to determination. I wasn't going to be some statistic, another mysterious disappearance in the vastness of the ocean. I was a scientist, damn it. I knew these waters. I could do this. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think logically. The reef. It had to be the elbow reef. I recognized the pattern of coral heads breaking the surface. If that was true, then safety was to the northwest. Islamorada would be busy, populated. I could find help there. With shaking hands, I restarted the engine, wincing at how loud it sounded in the gathering darkness. I pointed the bow northwest and began to move, slowly and carefully. Every shadow looked like a lurking boat, every wave sound like an approaching engine. The journey seemed to take forever. I strained my eyes in the darkness, searching for familiar landmarks, all the while expecting to feel the impact of another boat ramming into me. But slowly, painfully slowly, pinpricks of light began to appear on the horizon. Islamorada. Safety. As I neared the harbor, I saw flashing lights. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was them, that they'd somehow gotten ahead of me. But no, it was the Coast Guard. Someone must have reported a boat behaving erratically, because they were clearly on alert. I've never been so happy to be boarded in my life. As I babbled out my story to the skeptical-looking guardsmen, I felt the last of my energy drain away. They found no sign of the mysterious boat, no evidence to back up my wild tale. I'm sure they thought I was drunk or hallucinating from too much sun, but I knew what I'd seen, what I'd felt, the primal fear of being hunted, of being alone and vulnerable in a vast and uncaring sea. They escorted me back to the marina, my little sea sprite looking pathetic and battered next to their sleek vessel. As I stepped onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like days, my legs buckled beneath me. Strong hands caught me, lowered me gently to sit on the weathered boards of the dock. Someone pressed a bottle of water into my hands, and I drank greedily, suddenly aware of how parched I was. Around me, people moved in a blur of activity, harbor police taking statements, curious onlookers gathering to gawk at the spectacle. But all I could think about was that boat. Who were they? What did they want? Would they try again? The answers never came. The official report chalked it up to dehydration and sun exposure, a cautionary tale about the dangers of solo sailing. But I knew the truth. The ocean, my sanctuary, had shown me its darker side. The vastness I once found comforting now seemed menacing, full of hidden dangers and unseen threats. I didn't go out on the water again for a long time after that. When I finally did, it was with others, never alone. I kept my eyes on the horizon, always watching for that familiar silhouette, because I knew that somewhere out there, they might still be waiting. Watching, hunting. The sea had been my home, my passion. Now it was a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. Every time I smell salt air or hear the cry of a seagull, I'm back there, alone on a tiny boat, with unknown predators circling ever closer. The forest had always been my escape, a place of tranquility and adventure. But on that fateful day, it became a labyrinth of terror, where every shadow concealed a potential threat, and every sound could mean discovery. I'd been hiking these trails for years, always alone, always reveling in the solitude. There was something magical about being the only human for miles, surrounded by nothing but ancient trees and the whisper of wind through leaves. This trip was supposed to be no different, a weekend getaway to clear my head and recharge my spirit. The day started like any other. I set out at dawn, the morning mist still clinging to the forest floor, my backpack comfortably heavy with supplies. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth filled my lungs as I made my way deeper into the woods, following trails I knew by heart. It was late afternoon when I stumbled upon it. I'd gone off the main path, following a deer trail out of curiosity. The underbrush was thick, and I had to push my way through, the branches scratching at my arms and face. And then suddenly, the forest opened up, and there it was, a bunker, half hidden by vines and moss, its metal door standing slightly ajar. My heart raced with excitement. I'd heard rumors of old military installations scattered throughout these woods, leftover relics from a war long past. But I'd never actually found one. This was the kind of discovery that made all those solo hikes worth it. Throwing caution to the wind, I approached the bunker. The door creaked ominously as I pushed it open wider, the sound echoing in the stillness of the forest. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a space much larger than I'd expected. Dust motes danced in the air, disturbed for the first time in decades. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized this was no abandoned military outpost. The room was filled with crates and boxes, stacked haphazardly from floor to ceiling. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried open the nearest crate. My breath caught in my throat as I saw what was inside. Stacks of crisp $100 bills, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. My mind reeled. This wasn't just some forgotten cash. This was active. Someone was using this hidden bunker, and judging by the contents, it wasn't for anything legal. That's when I heard it. Voices, distant but growing closer. Men's voices, rough and angry, coming from the direction I'd entered the clearing. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. "I'm telling you, I saw someone come this way," one voice said, "closer now. If you led someone to the stash, Hank's gonna have your head," another replied. Panic surged through me. I had to hide and fast. I looked around frantically, finally spotting a small alcove behind some of the crates. I squeezed into the tight space, barely daring to breathe as I heard the bunker door swing open. Footsteps echoed on the metal floor, accompanied by the beam of a powerful flashlight sweeping the room. I pressed myself further into the alcove, praying the crates would keep me hidden. "See? Nothing here," one of the men said, his voice gruff. "You're jumping at shadows." "I could have sworn," the other replied, uncertainty clear in his tone. "Wait a minute. This crate's been opened." My heart nearly stopped. The crate I'd looked in, I'd left it open in my haste to hide. "Someone's been here," the first man growled. "Search the place. Whoever it is can't have gone far." I held my breath as I heard them moving around the room, shifting crates and boxes. They were methodical, thorough. It was only a matter of time before they found me. In desperation, I looked around my hiding spot for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy flashlight I'd stashed in my backpack. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. The footsteps grew closer. A crate near my hiding spot scraped across the floor. This was it. I was about to be discovered. In that moment, survival instinct took over. As the man's face appeared around the edge of the crate, I swung the flashlight with all my might. There was a sickening crunch as it connected with his temple, and he went down hard. The other man shouted in surprise, and I took advantage of the moment of confusion to bolt. I burst out of my hiding spot, leaping over the fallen man and racing for the door. "Hey, stop!" The second man's shout was accompanied by the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. I didn't stop. I ran like I'd never run before, bursting out of the bunker and into the fading afternoon light. Behind me, I heard the explosive crack of a gunshot, felt the whistle of a bullet passing far too close to my head. The forest that had once been so familiar now seemed alien and hostile. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. I had no idea where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get away. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the woods, shouting to each other. They knew the area better than I did, and they were gaining. In desperation, I veered off to the side, hoping to lose them in the denser part of the forest. The ground became steeper, the footing more treacherous. I slipped and stumbled, my hands scraped raw from catching myself on rough tree bark. As I scrambled up a steep incline, my foot caught on a root, and I fell hard. I tumbled down the slope, leaves and twigs scratching my skin, until I came to a stop at the bottom of a small ravine. For a moment, I lay there, dazed and winded. Then I heard it, the sound of running water, a stream. Hope surged through me. If I could follow the water, it might lead me out of the forest. I dragged myself to my feet, ignoring the protests of my battered body, and started to move along the stream bed. The water was shallow but fast-moving, the rocks slippery under my feet. The voices of my pursuers had faded, but I didn't dare slow down. They could still be out there, searching. As the light began to fade from the sky, turning the forest into a maze of lengthening shadows, a new fear set in. I was lost, injured, and alone in the wilderness, with dangerous men potentially still hunting me. I kept moving, using the stream as my guide. Hours passed, each one an eternity of fear and exhaustion. The moon rose, casting an eerie glow through the trees. Every snapping twig made me jump. Every rustling leaf could be a pursuer closing in. It was well past midnight when I finally saw it, lights in the distance. At first I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion, but as I drew closer, I realized it was real. A road, civilization. I stumbled out of the tree line onto the shoulder of a quiet country highway, my legs finally giving out beneath me. I collapsed onto the rough asphalt, torn between laughter and tears of relief. A car appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I waved my arms frantically, praying it wasn't my pursuers, praying they would stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An older couple peered out at me, their faces a mixture of concern and wariness. "Are you all right?" the woman asked, taking in my bedraggled appearance. I opened my mouth to explain, but where could I even begin? How could I make them understand the terror of the past few hours, the deadly secret hidden in the heart of the forest? In the end, I simply shook my head. "I got lost," I said, my voice hoarse. "Can you please take me to the police?" They did, and what followed was a whirlwind of questions, statements, and disbelieving looks. The police searched the area I described but found no trace of the bunker or the men who had chased me. Without evidence, it was just the wild story of a hiker who had gotten in over his head. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows, startling at every unexpected sound. The forest, once my sanctuary, now loomed in my mind as a place of hidden dangers and deadly secrets. I never went hiking alone again. The solitude I once craved now felt too much like vulnerability. But more than that, I could never shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the depths of the woods, those men were still waiting, still guarding their secret, and that one day, they might come looking for the hiker who had stumbled upon their hidden world and lived to tell the tale. The wilderness had shown me its darker side, reminding me that even in the most beautiful places, danger can lurk just out of sight. Every time I see the edge of the forest now, I can't help but wonder, what other secrets lie hidden among those ancient trees, waiting to be discovered by some unsuspecting wanderer? The moment I stepped into that house, I should have known something was off. But desperation has a way of blinding you to the warning signs, even when they're staring you right in the face. I'd been scrolling through house-sitting gigs for weeks, hoping to find a place to crash while I figured out my next move. When the listing for the Thompsons' place popped up, it seemed too good to be true. A sprawling suburban home, good pay, and only one weekend of work. I jumped at the chance, firing off an application before I could second-guess myself. The Thompsons were nice enough when I met them, if a bit distracted. Mrs. Thompson, a tall woman with perfectly coiffed hair, gave me a whirlwind tour of the house while Mr. Thompson, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit, hovered in the background. "Oliver's already in bed," Mrs. Thompson said, referring to their 5-year-old son. "He shouldn't wake up, but you know where his room is if he needs anything." I nodded, having babysat for them once before, but something in her tone made me pause. She seemed nervous. It was hard to tell with her Botoxed features. "One more thing," Mr. Thompson said, leading me to a sleek tablet mounted on the wall in the living room. "We've upgraded our security system. You can monitor all the cameras from here." I blinked in surprise. "Cameras? I don't remember there being cameras before." Mrs. Thompson laughed, a high, brittle sound. "Oh, you know how it is these days. Can't be too careful. Just keep an eye on things, will you? We'll feel so much better knowing you're watching." Before I could ask any more questions, they were out the door in a flurry of expensive perfume and final instructions. The house fell silent, save for the faint hum of the high-tech security system. I wandered into the kitchen, helping myself to a soda from the fridge. The tablet on the wall caught my eye, its screen divided into a grid showing various areas of the house. Most were dark and still: the backyard, the driveway, the upstairs hallway. As I sipped my drink, a notification popped up on my phone, a text from an unknown number. "I see you're settling in nicely." I froze, my blood running cold. How could anyone know that? I glanced at the cameras, suddenly feeling exposed. With shaking fingers, I typed out a reply. "Who is this?" The response came almost immediately. "A friend. Just keeping an eye on things, like you." My heart raced as I looked around the empty house. Was this some kind of joke? A test from the Thompsons? Another text? The blue sweater looks good on you. I looked down at myself in shock. I was indeed wearing a blue sweater. Whoever this was, they could see me right now. "Where are you?" I typed, my hands trembling. "How can you see me?" "I have my ways," came the cryptic reply. "But don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to warn you." Warning bells went off in my head. I should leave, I thought. Call the police, call the Thompsons, just get out of here. But curiosity, and, I admit, a touch of fear, kept me rooted to the spot. "Warn me about what?" I asked. There was a long pause before the next message arrived. "The Thompsons aren't who you think they are. This house, it's not safe. Keep your eyes open." A chill ran down my spine. I was about to demand more information when I heard a noise from upstairs. A soft thud, like something heavy being set down. My breath caught in my throat. Oliver was supposed to be asleep, and I was alone in the house. Wasn't I? I crept towards the stairs, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure anyone nearby could hear it. The security tablet caught my eye as I passed, and I froze in shock. The camera in Oliver's room showed an empty bed, the covers thrown back. Where was he? Another text buzzed on my phone. "Check the attic." Attic. I didn't remember seeing an attic during the tour, but as I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed a narrow door at the end of the hallway that I hadn't paid attention to before. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But what if Oliver was in trouble? I couldn't just leave him. With trembling hands, I reached for the door handle. It turned easily, revealing a set of steep stairs disappearing into darkness. "Hello?" I called softly, my voice quavering. "Oliver, are you up there?" No response, just an eerie silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I took a deep breath and began to climb, using my phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The stairs creaked ominously under my weight, each sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. As I neared the top, I began to make out shapes in the gloom, boxes piled high, old furniture draped in sheets. And there, in the far corner, a small figure huddled under a blanket. "Oliver," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "It's okay. You can come out. What are you doing up here?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond. A tendril of unease curled in my stomach as I approached. I reached out, gently pulling back the blanket, and screamed. It wasn't Oliver. It was a doll, life-sized and unnervingly realistic. Its glassy eyes stared up at me, a painted smile frozen on its porcelain face. My phone buzzed again, making me jump. With shaking hands, I looked at the message. "Now you see, get out while you can." Panic surged through me. I turned to flee, only to find my path blocked. Mr. Thompson stood at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'm disappointed, Emma," he said, his voice cold. "We gave you such simple instructions. All you had to do was watch the cameras." Mrs. Thompson appeared beside him. Oliver clutched tightly in her arms. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, his mouth covered by his mother's manicured hand. "We can't have you running off to tell tales," Mrs. Thompson said, her polite mask slipping to reveal something hard and cruel beneath. "Such a shame. We had such high hopes for you." I backed away, my mind racing. There had to be a way out, some way to escape. But I was trapped, cornered in this dusty attic with no way past them. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "What is all this?" Mr. Thompson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say we have specific tastes, and we need someone to cater to them, someone who won't be missed." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just some weird game or test. This was something far more sinister. In that moment of realization, my survival instincts kicked in. I lunged forward, catching them off guard. I managed to slip past Mr. Thompson, shoving him aside as I raced down the stairs. Behind me, I could hear shouts, the thunder of footsteps in pursuit. I ran through the house, my only thought to get to the front door, to freedom. My hand was on the doorknob when I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I cried out, my vision blurring as I stumbled. Whatever they had injected me with worked fast. The room spun, and I felt myself falling. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was Mrs. Thompson's face, looming over me with that same cold smile. "Sweet dreams, Emma," she said softly. "When you wake up, the real fun will begin." I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was in a small, windowless room. My head throbbed, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I made out shapes around me, other people, slumped against the walls or curled up on thin mattresses. My phone was gone, but a familiar weight in my pocket gave me a spark of hope. They hadn't found the small canister of pepper spray I always carried. I don't know how long I sat there, gathering my strength and waiting for an opportunity. But when it came, a moment of distraction as they brought in another victim, I was ready. The next few minutes were a blur of action and adrenaline. The pepper spray bought me precious seconds, enough to slip past my captors and find my way out of what I now realized was a basement. I emerged into the pre-dawn light, gulping in the fresh air as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station several miles away, where I finally called the police. The aftermath was a whirlwind of questions, investigations, and disbelief. The Thompsons were arrested, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of evidence. Other victims were found, some who had been missing for months. As for me, I'm still trying to process what happened. The trust I once had in people, in the simple act of helping out, has been shattered. Every house-sitting request now feels like a potential trap. Every friendly face a possible mask for something sinister. But I survived. And in doing so, I helped bring down an operation that had hurt so many others. It's a small comfort, but it's something to hold on to as I try to rebuild my life and my faith in humanity. The next time my phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number, though, I think I'll just throw it away. The night sky erupted, turning pitch black into a dazzling display of lightning. In that moment, I couldn't have imagined that nature's light show would be the prelude to a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I was driving home from my mom's place, exhausted after a long day of helping her move furniture and pack boxes. My daughter, Lily, was fast asleep in the back seat, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. The drive should have taken about 2 hours, but as the storm intensified, I knew we were in for a longer night. The rain came down in sheets, so heavy that even with the wipers on full speed, I could barely see 10 feet in front of the car. The road, a winding stretch of asphalt cutting through dense forest, became treacherous. Every flash of lightning illuminated the trees, creating eerie, twisted shadows that seemed to reach for us. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white with tension. We were still about an hour from home, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. I considered pulling over to wait it out, but the thought of sitting vulnerable on the side of this deserted road made me uneasy. That's when it happened. A deafening crack of thunder startled me, and in that split second of distraction, the car hit a slick patch of road. I felt the wheels lose traction, and suddenly we were spinning. Everything moved in slow motion. I saw the trees rushing towards us, heard Lily's startled cry as she woke up, felt the sickening lurch as the car left the road. Then, with a bone-jarring impact, we came to a stop. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of rain on the roof and my own ragged breathing. Then Lily's whimpers broke through the haze. "Mommy, what happened?" I twisted in my seat, ignoring the sharp pain in my neck. "It's okay, baby. We just had a little accident. Are you hurt?" She shook her head, eyes wide with fear. I breathed a sigh of relief, then turned my attention to our situation. The car had slid partway down an embankment, coming to rest at an awkward angle against a large tree. When I tried to start the engine, it sputtered weakly before dying completely. My heart sank. We were stuck, in the middle of nowhere, in a raging storm. I reached for my phone, praying we'd have signal, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No service. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm for Lily's sake. "We're going to be fine. Someone will come along soon and we'll get help." But as the minutes ticked by, turning into an hour, then 2, no one came. The rain continued its relentless assault, and the temperature in the car began to drop. Lily had crawled into the front seat with me, and I held her close, trying to share what little warmth I could. Just when I was starting to lose hope, I saw it, a pair of headlights cutting through the gloom. Relief washed over me as I saw a truck slow down and pull over. A figure emerged from the vehicle, hunched against the rain. As they approached our car, I rolled down the window a crack. "You folks all right?" A deep voice called out. In the flashes of lightning, I could make out a man's face under the brim of a baseball cap. "We've had an accident," I replied, my voice shaking with cold and leftover adrenaline. "Our car won't start. Do you have a phone we could use to call for help?" The man shook his head. "No service out here, ma'am, but I can give you a ride to the nearest town. It's about 20 miles up the road." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to trust a stranger, especially not in these circumstances. But what choice did we have? We couldn't stay here all night. "That would be great, thank you," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The man nodded. "All right then, grab what you need and come on over to my truck. We'll get you folks sorted out." I gathered our jackets and Lily's rabbit, then helped her out of the car. The rain soaked us instantly as we made our way up the embankment. The man was waiting by his truck, the passenger door already open. As we got closer, something made me pause. There was something off about his expression, a glint in his eye that sent a chill down my spine. "Actually," I said, pulling Lily closer to me, "maybe we should wait for the police. I'm sure someone will come looking for us soon." The man's demeanor changed instantly. The friendly facade dropped away, replaced by something hard and dangerous. "That wasn't really a request," he said, his voice low and menacing. My blood ran cold as I saw him reach into his jacket. The glint of metal caught my eye, a knife, its blade catching the dim light from the truck's interior. "Get in the truck," he ordered. "Both of you. Now." Lily whimpered, pressing herself against my side. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. We were alone, unarmed, with nowhere to run in this storm. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We don't want any trouble. Just let us go." He laughed, a harsh sound that was drowned out by another crack of thunder. "Oh, you're in trouble, all right. Now get in the damn truck before I lose my patience." I looked down at Lily, her eyes wide with terror, then back at the man with the knife. In that moment, I knew I had to do something, anything, to protect my daughter. With a surge of adrenaline, I shoved Lily behind me and lunged at the man. The move caught him off guard, and we both went down in the mud. I heard Lily scream as we grappled, the knife inches from my face. Rain and mud made everything slippery, and somehow I managed to knock the knife from his hand. But he was stronger, and soon he had me pinned, his hands around my throat. As my vision started to darken, I heard a dull thud, and suddenly, the pressure was gone. I gasped for air, rolling to my side to see Lily standing there, a large branch clutched in her small hands. She had hit him from behind, giving me the chance I needed. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing Lily's hand. "Run!" I shouted, and we took off into the woods. The undergrowth tore at our clothes as we ran blindly through the darkness. Behind us, I could hear the man cursing, the sound of his pursuit spurring us on despite our exhaustion. We ran until my lungs burned and Lily was sobbing with every breath. Finally, I spotted a hollow beneath a fallen tree. It wasn't much, but it was the only hiding spot available. I pulled Lily into the small space, covering her mouth gently with my hand to muffle her cries. We huddled there, shivering and terrified, as the sound of footsteps grew closer. "You can't hide forever," the man's voice rang out, unnervingly close. "I'll find you, and when I do..." His threat was cut off by a new sound. Sirens, growing louder by the second. Someone must have reported our abandoned car. The man swore loudly, and I heard his footsteps retreating rapidly. Still, we didn't move, too afraid that it might be a trick. It wasn't until we heard voices calling out, flashlight beams cutting through the trees, that I finally allowed myself to hope. "Here!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "We're over here!" The next few hours passed in a blur. Police officers and paramedics swarmed the area. Lily and I were wrapped in blankets, checked for injuries, and questioned extensively about what had happened. They found the man's truck, abandoned further up the road, but no sign of him. The knife was recovered from where it had fallen in our struggle, providing some evidence to corroborate our story. As we sat in the back of an ambulance, Lily curled up against my side. I couldn't stop shaking. The realization of how close we had come to a far worse fate hit me like a physical blow. "You saved us," I whispered to Lily, stroking her hair. "You were so brave." She looked up at me, her eyes still wide but no longer filled with terror. "We saved each other, Mommy," she said softly. In that moment, despite everything we had been through, I felt a fierce surge of pride and love. We had faced the unthinkable and survived, not just because of luck, but because we had fought for each other. The road ahead would be long. I knew there would be nightmares, therapy sessions, and a long journey to feeling safe again. But we were alive, and we were together. Whatever came next, we would face it as we had faced that stormy night, side by side, drawing strength from each other. As the ambulance pulled away, taking us to the hospital for a thorough checkup, I held Lily close. The storm was finally beginning to subside, the first hints of dawn peeking through the clouds. It was a new day, and we had survived to see it. The memory of that night would stay with us forever, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the world. But it would also serve as a testament to our strength, our love, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. In the face of true terror, we had discovered a resilience we never knew we possessed. And that, I realized, was a light no storm could ever extinguish. The old key turned in the lock with a heavy click, and as I pushed open the cabin door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was opening more than just a weekend getaway. Little did I know, I was stepping into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about solitude and safety. I had rented the cabin for a month, desperately needing an escape from the chaos of city life and the pressures of my high-stress job. The listing had promised seclusion, peace, and a chance to reconnect with nature. No Wi-Fi, no cell service, just me and the great outdoors. It sounded perfect. The cabin itself was charming in a rustic sort of way. A single large room with a loft bedroom, a small kitchenette, and a fireplace that dominated one wall. It smelled of pine and wood smoke, and for a moment, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. I spent that first day settling in, unpacking my supplies and exploring the surrounding woods. The autumn air was crisp, filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant call of birds. As night fell, I built a fire and curled up on the worn but comfortable sofa with a book, feeling more relaxed than I had in months. It was sometime in the middle of the night when I first noticed something odd. I woke up, disoriented, the fire now just glowing embers. Something had disturbed my sleep, but I couldn't put my finger on what. As I lay there, straining my ears in the darkness, I realized what had woken me. Footsteps, soft but distinct, moving across the cabin's wooden floor. My heart began to race. I was alone out here, miles from the nearest neighbor. There shouldn't be anyone else in the cabin. I held my breath, listening intently, but the sound had stopped. After a few minutes of tense silence, I convinced myself it must have been the old building settling, or perhaps an animal on the roof. I was a city girl after all, not used to the sounds of nature. I fell back into an uneasy sleep, but when I woke the next morning, the unsettling feeling lingered. As I moved around the cabin, making coffee and preparing breakfast, I couldn't shake the sense that things were slightly off. A chair that I didn't remember moving. A book on the table that I could have sworn I'd left by the bed. Small things, easy to dismiss, but they niggled at the back of my mind. Over the next few days, the oddities continued to pile up. I'd come back from a hike to find a window open that I was certain I'd closed. One morning, I woke to find all the cupboard doors in the kitchen standing open. Each time, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was more forgetful than I thought. Maybe the isolation was making me paranoid. But on the fifth night, something happened that I couldn't explain away. I woke up suddenly, that same sense of wrongness pulling me from sleep. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a figure standing at the foot of the bed. My blood turned to ice in my veins. It was just a silhouette, motionless, watching me. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, it would be gone. When I finally gathered the courage to look again, the figure had vanished. I spent the rest of the night huddled under the blankets, every creak of the cabin making me flinch. When morning came, I seriously considered packing up and leaving. But the rational part of my brain insisted it must have been a particularly vivid nightmare, brought on by stress and an overactive imagination. I decided to stay, but I couldn't shake my unease. I began to take precautions, checking and double-checking the locks, setting up makeshift alarms using cans and string at the doors and windows. I kept a heavy flashlight by the bed, both for light and as a potential weapon. For a couple of days, things seemed to calm down. No more mysterious movements, no more unexplained open windows. I started to relax again, enjoying long walks in the woods and peaceful evenings by the fire. I even laughed at myself for getting so worked up over nothing. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up to the sound of humming, a soft, melodic tune that seemed to be coming from the main room of the cabin. My first thought was that I'd left a radio on, but I knew that was impossible. There was no radio, and even if there had been, there was no signal out here. Gripping my flashlight tightly, I crept down from the loft bedroom. The humming stopped abruptly. In the dim light from the dying fire, I could make out a figure sitting in the armchair by the window. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "Who's there?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure stood slowly, and I raised my flashlight, ready to swing it if necessary. But what the beam illuminated made me freeze in confusion and terror. It was me. Or rather, someone who looked exactly like me. Same hair, same face, even wearing a copy of the pajamas I had on. The doppelganger smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. There was something predatory in those familiar eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The other me tilted its head, the smile never wavering. When it spoke, it was with my voice, but there was an underlying tone that sent chills down my spine. "I'm you," it said simply. "The you that belongs here." I shook my head, backing away. "No, that's impossible. You can't be me. I'm me." It took a step forward for every step I took back. "I've been waiting for you to notice me," it said. "I've been trying to warn you. This isn't your place. You need to leave." My back hit the wall, and I realized I was cornered. The thing wearing my face was only a few feet away now. "Why?" I asked, stalling for time as I frantically tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. "Why do I need to leave?" The doppelganger's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Because if you don't leave on your own, I'll have to make you leave. And you won't like that." The others didn't. A chill ran through me at its words. Others. Had there been others before me who had rented this cabin, only to disappear? In that moment of distraction, it lunged at me. I swung the flashlight instinctively, feeling it connect with a sickening thud. The thing wearing my face stumbled back, a look of surprise and anger distorting its features. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I ran for the door, fumbling with the lock with shaking hands. Behind me, I could hear it recovering, its footsteps hurrying across the wooden floor. Finally, the door swung open, and I burst out into the cool night air. I ran blindly into the woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear it pursuing me, its breathing unnaturally even despite the chase. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. When I couldn't run anymore, I dove behind a fallen tree, trying to muffle my gasping breaths. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of pursuit, but the forest had gone eerily silent. For hours, I huddled there, too terrified to move. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally gathered the courage to peek out from my hiding spot. There was no sign of the doppelganger, no sign of anything unusual at all. Slowly, cautiously, I made my way back to the cabin. Everything looked normal in the pale morning light, but I knew I couldn't stay. I threw my belongings haphazardly into my bag, not bothering to clean up or leave things as I'd found them. I just needed to get out. As I was about to walk out the door for the last time, something caught my eye. There, on the small table by the entrance, was a note that hadn't been there before. With trembling hands, I picked it up and read, "Next time, listen to the warnings. Not everyone will be as kind as I was. This place isn't for you. Don't come back." It was written in my handwriting. I dropped the note and ran to my car, not looking back as I sped down the gravel road. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the familiar noise and chaos of the city. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself that it had all been some sort of stress-induced hallucination. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something impossible, something terrifying, had happened in that cabin. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? But I also never went back to the woods, never rented another secluded cabin. The solitude I once craved now feels too much like an invitation for the unexplainable. Sometimes, late at night, I catch a glimpse of movement in a mirror or a window reflection, and for a heart-stopping moment, I think I see that other version of myself, watching and waiting. And I wonder, not for the first time, if I truly escaped that night, or if some part of me is still there in those woods, warning away the next unsuspecting visitor. The peace I sought in that cabin came at a price I never expected to pay. Now, I live with the knowledge that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can encounter is yourself. The crackling campfire had always been a source of comfort, but that night, as hostile eyes gleamed in the darkness beyond its light, it became a beacon marking us for danger. I'd been camping and hiking solo for years, finding solace in the quiet majesty of the wilderness. This trip to the Ozarks was supposed to be no different. A week of solitude, surrounded by nothing but trees and sky. I'd carefully planned my route, packed my gear, and set out with a spring in my step, eager to leave the noise and stress of the city behind. The first few days were blissful. I hiked deep into the backcountry, setting up camp each night in picturesque spots beside babbling brooks or atop ridges with breathtaking views. The weather was perfect, cool nights and warm, sunny days. I spent my time exploring, identifying plants, and even managed to catch a few trout for dinner. As I sat by my campfire each evening, watching the stars emerge in the velvety sky, I felt a profound sense of peace. It was on the fourth day that everything changed. I was following a less traveled trail, enjoying the challenge of navigating the rougher terrain, when I first saw them. 3 men, emerging from the trees ahead. They were dressed in worn clothes that had seen better days, and there was something in their stance, in the way their eyes locked onto me that set off alarm bells in my head. "Well, well," the tallest of them called out, his voice carrying a hint of amusement that didn't reach his eyes. "Looks like we got ourselves a tourist." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice steady as I replied, "Just out for a hike. Beautiful country you have here." The shortest man, his face obscured by a scraggly beard, spat on the ground. "Ain't our country. It's everyone's country. Ain't that right, boys?" The third man, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward. There was something predatory in his movement that made my heart rate spike. "Thing is, stranger, not everyone knows how to respect the land. Some folks, they come out here thinking they can do whatever they want, trample all over the place, leave their trash behind. We don't take kindly to that sort of behavior." I held up my hands in a placating gesture. "I completely understand. I always follow leave no trace principles. Pack in, pack out. I have nothing but respect for the wilderness." The tall one laughed, but it was a harsh sound, devoid of any real humor. "That's so. Then I reckon you won't mind if we take a look at your camp. Make sure you're keeping things nice and tidy." It wasn't a request. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. These men weren't park rangers or conservationists. They were looking for trouble, and I had the sinking feeling that I was about to become the target of their hostility, regardless of how I answered. "My camp is a few miles back," I said, gesturing vaguely over my shoulder. "I'm just out for a day hike, but I'd be happy to show you how I've left my previous campsites if you'd like to backtrack." The bearded man stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell stale sweat and something else. Moonshine, maybe. "Now why don't I believe you?" he growled. "I think you're lying to us, city boy, and we don't like liars in these parts." My mind raced, trying to find a way out of this increasingly dangerous situation. I was outnumbered and unarmed, save for my hiking poles. And even if I could outrun them, they undoubtedly knew these woods far better than I did. "Look," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not looking for any trouble. Why don't I just head back the way I came and we can all go about our day?" The third man, who had been quiet until now, suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the front of my shirt. "You ain't going nowhere," he snarled. "Not until we teach you a lesson about respecting other folks and territory." In that moment, survival instinct took over. I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the groin. As he doubled over, I shoved him back into his companions, creating a moment of chaos that I used to my advantage. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have time to consult my map or compass. All I knew was that I had to put as much distance between myself and those men as possible. I could hear them shouting behind me, their voices filled with rage and the promise of violence. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just hours before now felt like a green maze, full of obstacles designed to trip me up or slow me down. Branches whipped at my face. Roots threatened to snag my feet. But fear gave me speed and agility I didn't know I possessed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. Only then did I allow myself to slow, straining my ears for any sound of pursuit. The forest was eerily quiet, save for my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. As the adrenaline began to fade, I realized I had a new problem. In my panic, I had run blindly, with no regard for direction or landmarks. I was hopelessly lost. The sun was starting to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Soon it would be dark, and the thought of being lost in these woods at night, with hostile strangers potentially still hunting me, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I needed to find shelter, somewhere defensible where I could rest and try to get my bearings. After a few minutes of careful searching, I found a small cave formed by a jumble of massive boulders. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As I huddled in the cave, the last light fading from the sky, I took stock of my situation. I had my day pack, which contained some water, a few energy bars, and basic first aid supplies. My main pack, with my tent and the bulk of my food, was back at my last campsite, if those men hadn't found and ransacked it already. I had no idea where I was in relation to the trail or my planned route. My phone, which I'd been using as a backup GPS, had no signal out here. I was well and truly on my own. The night was long and terrifying. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching danger. I dozed fitfully, jolting awake at the slightest noise, my heart racing. As dawn broke, I cautiously emerged from my hiding spot. The forest looked different in the pale morning light, less threatening, but no less confusing. I picked a direction that I hoped would lead me back to familiar territory and started walking. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. My water ran out, and thirst began to gnaw at me, but I didn't dare stop at any of the streams I crossed, fearing that lingering in one spot for too long would make me an easy target. It was late afternoon when I heard voices again. My first instinct was to hide, but as I listened, I realized these voices were different. A man and a woman, talking and laughing casually. Other hikers, relief washed over me as I called out to them. They were startled at first, but their surprise quickly turned to concern as they took in my disheveled appearance and heard my story. The couple, experienced backpackers, helped me get my bearings. We were miles from where I thought I was, but luckily, they knew of a ranger station not too far away. They shared their water and some food, and insisted on accompanying me to ensure I made it safely. As we hiked, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see those three men emerging from the trees. But we made it to the ranger station without incident. The rangers took my report seriously, but warned me that without any real evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They offered to escort me back to my original campsite to retrieve my gear, but the thought of returning to that area filled me with dread. In the end, I decided to cut my trip short and head home. As I drove away from the mountains, my hands still shaking slightly on the steering wheel, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly my peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare. The wilderness I loved had shown me its darker side, a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, danger can lurk just out of sight. I still go hiking and camping, but never alone now. And whenever I'm in the backcountry, I find myself more alert, more aware of my surroundings. The peace I once found in solitude has been replaced by a cautious respect for the unknown. Those men in the woods had tried to teach me a lesson about territory and respect. In the end, I suppose they did, just not the one they intended. I learned that the line between civilization and savagery is thinner than we like to believe, and that sometimes the most dangerous animals in the forest walk on two legs. The neon sign flickered weakly in the rain, casting an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. Little did I know, as I pulled into that run-down motel, that I was checking into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. I'd been driving for hours, my eyes stinging from the strain of focusing on the rain-slicked highway. The storm had been relentless, turning what should have been a routine cross-country drive into a white-knuckle ordeal. When I saw the vacancy sign glowing in the distance, it felt like a beacon of hope. The Paradise Inn was anything but paradise. The paint was peeling, the windows grimy, and the whole place had an air of neglect that made my skin crawl. But it was late. I was exhausted, and the next town was miles away. Beggars can't be choosers, I told myself as I pulled into a parking spot. The man at the front desk barely looked up from his ancient TV as I walked in, shaking off the rain. He was old, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Need a room?" I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. He grunted, reaching for a key without taking his eyes off the flickering screen. $30, cash only. I handed over the money, trying not to think about what kind of place doesn't take credit cards in this day and age. He passed me the key, an actual metal key, not a key card, and went back to ignoring me. My room was at the far end of the building, as far from the office as possible. The key stuck in the lock, and I had to jiggle it a few times before the door finally swung open with a creak that set my teeth on edge. The room itself was about what I expected. Small, musty, with decor that hadn't been updated since the 70s. But it was dry, and the bed looked clean enough. I dropped my bag on the faded carpet and sank onto the mattress with a sigh of relief. That's when I noticed the silence. The rain had stopped, and in its absence, the quiet felt oppressive. No traffic noise, no sounds of other guests. It was as if the whole world had disappeared, leaving just me in this dilapidated motel. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake, my heart racing. Something had woken me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. As I lay there in the darkness, straining my ears, I heard it, voices, muffled but distinct, coming from somewhere nearby. At first, I thought it must be other guests, but as I listened, I realized the voices were coming from outside my window. I crept over, careful not to make a sound, and peered through a gap in the dusty curtains. 2 men were standing in the shadows just beyond the reach of the parking lot lights. They were talking in low, urgent tones, glancing around furtively as if afraid of being overheard. Something about their manner set off alarm bells in my head. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but a few phrases jumped out at me. Shipment coming in tonight. Gotta be careful. Cops have been sniffing around. Boss won't tolerate any more screw-ups. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was overhearing. This wasn't just some shady business deal. This sounded like something far more sinister. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? I had no real evidence, just snippets of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. And something told me that in a place like this, the local cops might not be too eager to investigate. I was contemplating my options when I heard a sharp knock at my door. My heart leapt into my throat. Had they seen me watching? Housekeeping, a woman's voice called out. I frowned. Housekeeping? At this hour? In a place like this? Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. A middle-aged woman stood there, her eyes darting nervously down the hallway. Please, she whispered, her voice trembling. You have to help me. They're going to kill me. Before I could react, she pushed past me into the room, closing the door quickly behind her. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see the fear etched on her face, the bruises peeking out from under her collar. Who's going to kill you? I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew the answer. The men who run this place, she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. It's not just a motel. They bring girls here. Young girls. They keep them in the basement until the buyers come. Horror washed over me as the implications of her words sank in. Human trafficking. Right here, in this unassuming little motel in the middle of nowhere. We need to call the police, I said, reaching for my phone. She grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with panic. No, you don't understand. The local cops are in on it. They get a cut to look the other way. My mind reeled. If we couldn't trust the police, and what could we do? I thought about simply getting in my car and driving away, pretending I'd never seen or heard anything. But one look at the desperation on the woman's face, and I knew I couldn't do that. Okay, I said, trying to sound calmer than I felt. We need a plan. Is there anyone we can trust? Anyone who can help? She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know. I've been trying to find a way out for months, but they watch us so closely. Tonight was my only chance. They're distracted because of the new shipment coming in. A cold dread settled in my stomach. New shipment? You mean... She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. More girls. They'll be here soon. In that moment, I knew we had to act. We couldn't wait for help that might never come. Somehow, we had to find a way to stop this, to save those girls and anyone else trapped in this hellish place. Tell me everything you know, I said. Every detail about how this place operates, where they keep the girls, everything. For the next hour, she filled me in on the inner workings of the Paradise Inn's dark underbelly. As she spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was the only chance we had. Using the motel's ancient landline, we made a series of calls to the state police, to the FBI, to every news outlet I could think of. We reported a major human trafficking operation, giving as many details as we could. We knew the local authorities might try to cover it up, but with enough outside pressure, they wouldn't be able to. Then came the dangerous part. While the woman, Maria, she finally told me her name was, created a distraction in the parking lot, I snuck down to the basement. The lock on the door was flimsy, and I managed to break it open with a fire extinguisher I'd taken from the hallway. What I saw inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. A dozen young women and girls, huddled in the darkness, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some looked like they'd been there for months, others only days. My heart broke for them, for the trauma they'd endured and the innocence they'd lost. "It's okay," I said softly, holding out my hands to show I meant no harm. "We're here to help. You're safe now." Getting them out was nerve-wracking. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant voice made my heart race. But somehow, miraculously, we made it. We piled into my car in an old van Maria had hot-wired, and we drove. We were barely a mile down the road when we saw the flashing lights. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was the corrupt local police coming to drag us back. But as the vehicles got closer, I saw state trooper insignias and even a few FBI jackets. The next few hours were a blur of questions, statements, and tearful reunions as parents were contacted. I watched as the girls were led away to safety, as men in handcuffs were shoved into police cars. The enormity of what we'd done, what we'd uncovered, began to sink in. Maria found me as things were winding down, her eyes red from crying but a smile on her face. "Thank you," she said simply, pulling me into a tight hug. "You saved us. All of us." As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the scene, I sat on the hood of my car, watching the Paradise Inn sign being taken down. The nightmare was over, but I knew the effects would linger, for the girls, for Maria, for me. I had set out on a simple road trip and stumbled into a den of horrors, but in doing so, I had also discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I had faced true evil and, against all odds, emerged victorious. As I finally pulled away from the Paradise Inn for the last time, I knew I was leaving as a different person than the one who had arrived just hours before. The world seemed darker now, knowing what people were capable of, but it also seemed brighter, knowing that even in the darkest places, hope and courage could prevail. I drove on, carrying with me the weight of what I'd witnessed, but also the knowledge that sometimes one person can make a difference. And I silently vowed that I would never again turn a blind eye to the suffering of others, no matter how tempting it might be to simply drive on by. The dusty key slid into the lock with a satisfying click, and as I pushed open the heavy oak door, I had no idea I was stepping into a mystery that would consume my life and nearly end it. I'd always been fascinated by old houses, their history, the stories held within their walls. So when I stumbled upon the listing for the Blackwood Manor, a sprawling Victorian on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for decades, I couldn't resist. The price was surprisingly low, and the real estate agent seemed almost too eager to close the deal. I should have known then that something was off, but my excitement blinded me to the red flags. The house was everything I dreamed of and more. High ceilings, intricate woodwork, a grand staircase that swept up to the second floor. Yes, it needed work, a lot of work, but I could see the potential beneath the layers of dust and neglect. I spent that first day exploring, mapping out renovation plans in my head. It wasn't until I reached the attic that things took a turn for the strange. The space was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, typical attic fare, but tucked away in a corner, partially hidden by a sheet. I found something unexpected. A door. It was smaller than a regular door, maybe 4 feet high, and seemed out of place in the slanted attic wall. Curious, I tried the handle, but it was locked. I made a mental note to ask the real estate agent about it later. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A glint of metal peeking out from under an old trunk. I moved the trunk aside and found a small key, ornate and tarnished with age. On a whim, I tried it in the little door's lock. To my surprise, it fit perfectly. The door opened with a groan, revealing a small, dark room beyond. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the space. What I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, yellowed with age and curling at the edges. They showed people, men, women, children, all in various poses and settings. But something about them felt off. The expressions were too stiff, the eyes too vacant, and in every single photo, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was a shadowy figure lurking in the background. I stepped closer, examining the photos. The shadowy figure was always there, sometimes just a hint of a silhouette, sometimes clearer, a tall, thin shape with unnaturally long limbs. In some of the photos, it seemed to be reaching for the subjects, its fingers elongated and claw-like. A chill ran down my spine. This had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, right? A previous owner's weird art project or something. But as I looked closer, I recognized some of the settings in the newer-looking photos. They were places around town, the park, the old library, even the street outside this very house. I was so engrossed in the photos that I didn't hear the attic door close. It wasn't until I turned to leave that I realized I was locked in. Panic set in as I pounded on the door, calling for help even though I knew no one was in the house. After what felt like hours, the door suddenly swung open. I nearly fell out of the little room, my heart racing. The attic was empty, just as I'd left it. But something felt different. The air was heavier, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I fled downstairs, trying to convince myself that I'd just accidentally locked myself in. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Over the next few weeks, as I worked on renovating the house, strange things kept happening. I'd wake up to find furniture rearranged, or doors I'd sworn I'd closed standing wide open. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. But the most unsettling thing was the photographs. New ones kept appearing in that little room. Photos I knew hadn't been there before, and they were of me. Me sleeping, me working on the house, me walking down the street, always with that shadowy figure lurking in the background, getting closer each time. I became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the photos and the house's history. I spent hours at the local library, digging through old newspapers and town records. What I found chilled me to the bone. The house had a dark past. Over the decades, dozens of people who had lived there had disappeared without a trace. The disappearances were always brushed off. People assumed they'd moved away without telling anyone, or run off to start a new life. But I knew better. I started seeing connections everywhere. The shadowy figure in the photos matched descriptions in local legends of an entity called the Watcher. People claimed it stalked its victims, growing stronger as it fed on their fear, before finally taking them. I knew how it sounded. I knew that if I told anyone, they'd think I was crazy. But I couldn't deny what was happening. The Watcher was real, and it was after me. I tried to leave, to sell the house and run, but something always stopped me. My car would mysteriously break down, or sudden storms would make the roads impassable. It was as if the house itself was keeping me there. Then came the night that nearly broke me. I woke up to the sound of my camera clicking, the old film camera I'd found in the attic and had been meaning to get rid of. In the dim light, I saw it floating in midair, turning to point at me. Behind it, barely visible, was the shadowy figure from the photos. I screamed and ran, locking myself in the bathroom. I stayed there until dawn, shaking and sobbing. When I finally gathered the courage to come out, I found a newly developed photo on my bed. It showed me sleeping, and the watcher's hand reaching for my face, closer than ever before. I knew then that I was running out of time. I had to find a way to stop this thing, to break whatever hold it had on the house and on me. My research had turned up whispers of a ritual, a way to banish the watcher. It was dangerous, and there was no guarantee it would work. But I was out of options. I spent the next week preparing, gathering the items I needed and steeling my nerves. On the night of the full moon, I stood in the center of the attic, surrounded by candles and symbols I'd drawn on the floor. The little room's door stood open, the photographs seeming to watch me with malevolent intent. As I began the ritual, chanting words in a language I didn't understand, the house came alive around me. Wind howled through the halls. Doors slammed open and shut, and I could hear whispers coming from the walls themselves. The shadowy figure appeared, more solid than I'd ever seen it. Its face was a void, its arms reaching for me with those terrifying, elongated fingers. I wanted to run, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I forced myself to stand my ground. I was the last line of defense. If I failed, this thing would keep taking victims for who knows how long. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, when the watcher was so close I could feel the cold emanating from its form, there was a flash of blinding light. The thing screeched, an inhuman sound that made my ears ring. And then, suddenly, it was gone. The house fell silent. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over everything lifted, leaving behind a sense of peace I hadn't felt since I first stepped foot in Blackwood Manor. In the little room, I found the photographs crumbling to dust. Whatever power had preserved them was gone. I'd like to say that was the end of it, that I moved on and everything went back to normal. But the truth is, you don't go through something like that without it changing you. I still live in the house. I couldn't bear to let someone else move in, unaware of its history, but I've turned it into a sanctuary of sorts. A place for people who've experienced things that defy explanation. Sometimes, late at night, I think I catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye, but I'm not afraid anymore. I faced the darkness and came out the other side. Whatever's out there, whatever's lurking in the shadows of old houses and hidden rooms, I'll be ready for it. The Watcher taught me that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we like to believe, but it also showed me that we're stronger than we know. Sometimes, all it takes to banish the monsters is the courage to stand our ground and face them head on. As for the camera that started it all, it sits on my mantelpiece and a reminder of what I've been through and what I've overcome. I keep it there, not out of fear, but as a testament to the fact that sometimes the most terrifying things can be captured in a single frame, and that with bravery and determination, even the darkest shadows can be brought into the light. The scream of tires on asphalt shattered the night silence, and in that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. What should have been a routine drive through a sleepy town became a desperate fight for survival, with every shadow concealing potential danger and every decision carrying the weight of life or death. It was just past midnight, and I was driving through the small town of Millbrook on my way home from a late shift at the hospital 2 counties over. The streets were deserted, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp and the glow of my headlights. I was tired, my mind already drifting to thoughts of my warm bed waiting for me at home. That's when I saw it. In the harsh glare of my high beams, 2 men were struggling in an alley beside the town's only bank. One man had the other in a chokehold, and even from a distance I could see the glint of a knife. Without thinking, I hit the brakes, my car screeching to a stop. For a split second, everything froze. The 2 men turned to look at me, and I saw the flash of panic in the attacker's eyes. Then, chaos erupted. The man with the knife shoved his victim to the ground and took off running. The other man staggered to his feet, clutching his throat and gasping for air. I should have driven away. I should have called the police and let them handle it. But the nurse in me couldn't leave someone who might need medical attention. I got out of my car, already reaching for my phone to call 911. Are you okay? I called out, approaching cautiously. I'm a nurse. Let me help you. The man looked up at me, and in that moment, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. There was no fear or gratitude in his eyes, only cold, calculating anger. Before I could react, he lunged at me, his hand closing around my wrist with bruising force. You shouldn't have stopped, he growled, twisting my arm behind my back. I felt the press of cold metal against my neck, the knife I'd seen earlier. Now you're coming with us. Us. The word sent a chill down my spine. This hadn't been an attack. It had been a performance, designed to lure in some unsuspecting good Samaritan. And I'd fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. The other man reappeared, emerging from the shadows of the alley. He was grinning, a predatory gleam in his eye that made my blood run cold. Well, he said, his voice low and menacing. Looks like we caught ourselves a hero. They marched me back to my car, the knife a constant threat against my skin. You're driving, the first man ordered, shoving me into the driver's seat. And if you try anything stupid, I'll cut your throat before you can blink. As we pulled away from the curb, my mind raced. Where were they taking me? What did they want? The streets of Millbrook blurred past as I drove, following their terse directions. We were heading out of town, towards the network of back roads that wound through the surrounding forest. Turn here, the man in the passenger seat barked, pointing to a narrow dirt road I'd never noticed before. The pavement gave way to gravel, then to bare earth as we drove deeper into the woods. The branches of overhanging trees scraped against the roof of my car, and I could feel the uneven ground jolting us with every yard. Finally, we came to a stop in a small clearing. An old, dilapidated cabin stood before us, its windows dark and empty. My captors forced me out of the car and towards the building, the knife now pressed against my lower back. As we entered the cabin, the smell of damp wood and decay assaulted my nostrils. The interior was sparse, a few rickety chairs, a table covered in maps and papers, and in the corner, something that made my heart stop. A large metal safe, its door standing open to reveal stacks of cash and jewelry. Congratulations, the man who'd been driving sneered. You've just stumbled into the biggest bank heist this county's ever seen. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. These weren't just opportunistic thugs, they were organized criminals, dangerous and desperate. And I was a loose end, a witness they couldn't afford to let go. For the next few hours, I sat tied to a chair, listening as they argued about what to do with me. One wanted to kill me outright, while the other thought I might be useful as a hostage if things went south. All the while, my mind worked frantically, searching for any chance of escape. It came in the most unexpected way. A loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, making us all jump. A moment later, rain began to pour down, drumming on the tin roof with deafening intensity. In the confusion, I saw my opportunity. I threw myself backwards, the force of my fall breaking the old, rotting chair. Before my captors could react, I was on my feet, my hands still bound but free from the chair. I ran, crashing through the cabin's flimsy back door and into the storm-lashed night. The rain was a blessing and a curse. It obscured my vision, making it hard to see where I was going, but it also masked the sound of my flight and washed away any trail I might have left. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear shouting and the crash of pursuit. They were coming after me, and they knew these woods far better than I did. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. I was lost, alone, and in more danger than I'd ever been in my life, but I refused to give up. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that dark, wet maze of trees. Every sound made me flinch, certain that at any moment I'd feel the bite of that knife or the impact of a bullet. But somehow, miraculously, I kept going. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw something through the trees, lights. As I got closer, I realized it was a highway. Relief flooded through me, giving me a final burst of energy. I broke through the tree line and onto the shoulder of the road, waving my still-bound hands frantically at the oncoming headlights. The car screeched to a stop, and for a heart-stopping moment, I feared it might be my pursuers. But then the driver's door opened, and a concerned-looking woman stepped out. "Oh my God," she gasped, taking in my bedraggled, rain-soaked appearance and the ropes around my wrists. "What happened to you?" The story poured out of me in a rush as she used a pocket knife to cut me free. By the time I'd finished, she was already on the phone with the police, relaying our location and the details of what had happened. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights and questions. The police swarmed the area, and by dawn, they'd found the cabin and arrested one of my captors. The other was still at large, but with the evidence seized from the cabin, it was only a matter of time before he was caught too. As I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. I watched the sun rise over Millbrook. The town was waking up, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded in its quiet streets and surrounding woods. People were going about their morning routines, heading to work or school, their lives unchanged. But I knew I'd never see this place, or anywhere, the same way again. The world suddenly seemed more dangerous, full of hidden threats and unseen dangers. But it also felt more precious. I had stared death in the face and come out the other side. I had found strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. In the days and weeks that followed, as I gave statements and testified in court, people called me a hero. But I didn't feel like one. I felt like a survivor, someone who'd been thrust into an impossible situation and somehow made it through. The experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, but I'm also more appreciative of the little things: a quiet night at home, a walk in the park without looking over my shoulder, the simple joy of feeling safe. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the sound of footsteps pursuing me through a rain-soaked forest. But then I remind myself that I'm safe, that I survived. And in those moments, I feel a fierce pride and a deep gratitude for the strength I found within myself on that terrifying night. The scream of tires that started it all still echoes in my memory. But now, it's not just a sound of danger and fear. It's a reminder of the night I discovered what I was truly capable of, and the beginning of a journey that taught me the true meaning of survival. The first droplets of rain hit my face as thunder rumbled in the distance. In that moment, I had no idea that the approaching storm would be the least of my worries, or that the cabin I spotted through the trees would become my own personal hell. I'd been hiking the Appalachian Trail for 3 days, enjoying the solitude and the challenge. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but anyone who's spent time in the mountains knows how quickly things can change. As the wind picked up and the sky darkened ominously, I knew I needed to find shelter fast. That's when I saw it. A small cabin nestled in a clearing about 100 yards off the trail. It looked old but solid, the kind of refuge hikers dream about when caught in a storm. I made a beeline for it, reaching the porch just as the heavens opened up. The door wasn't locked, which I took as a good sign. Clearly, this was meant to be a shelter for hikers like myself. I stepped inside, shaking the rain from my jacket and taking in my surroundings. The cabin was simple but cozy. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a stack of firewood nearby. There was a small kitchenette, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. It wasn't luxury, but compared to my tiny tent, it felt like a 5-star hotel. I set about making myself comfortable, grateful for the unexpected reprieve from the elements. I got a fire going, its warmth chasing away the damp chill that had settled into my bones. As I heated up some of my trail rations, I couldn't help but feel that I'd lucked out. The storm outside was intensifying, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees. In here, I was safe and dry. It wasn't until I was settling in for the night, curled up on the surprisingly comfortable bed, that I first noticed something odd. There was a sound, barely audible over the storm, coming from somewhere in the cabin. A faint scratching, like nails on wood. I sat up, straining my ears. It seemed to be coming from the floor near the fireplace. Probably just a mouse, I told myself. Old cabins like this were bound to have some wildlife visitors. Still, I got up to investigate, flashlight in hand. As I approached the fireplace and the scratching stopped, I knelt down, running my hand over the floorboards, looking for any signs of rodent activity. That's when I felt it, a slight give in one of the boards, as if it wasn't fully nailed down. Curiosity got the better of me. I worked my fingers into the gap and lifted. The board came up easily, revealing a small space beneath. And in that space was a book. It was old, its leather cover cracked and faded. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, I pulled it out. A diary, maybe. Some record of the cabin's history. I opened it carefully, mindful of its fragile state. The pages were filled with handwritten entries. The ink faded, but still legible. I started reading, and felt my blood run cold. The diary belonged to a man named Jacob Hawthorne. He described in chilling detail how he had built this cabin as a trap, a place to lure unsuspecting hikers. He wrote about the calmest guests account he had entertained here, the things he had done to them. The level of depravity was horrifying. But the most terrifying part was the date of the last entry. It was from just 2 weeks ago. I dropped the book like it had burned me, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some sick joke, right? But as I looked around the cabin with new eyes, I started noticing things I had overlooked before. The scratches on the inside of the door, the faint stains on the floor that could be explained away as water damage, but now looked disturbingly like something else. And the realization that there was no lock on the outside of the door, but there was a heavy bolt on the inside. Panic set in. I had to get out of here, storm or no storm. I grabbed my pack and made for the door, only to find that it wouldn't open. The wood had swollen in the damp, jamming it in the frame. I pushed harder, my breath coming in short gasps, but it wouldn't budge. That's when I heard it. Over the howling of the wind and the pounding of rain on the roof, there was a new sound. Footsteps on the porch. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The footsteps stopped at the door. There was a pause, and then a key turned in the lock. The door swung open, and there he stood. An older man, tall and lean, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to glitter in the firelight. He was soaked from the rain, but he was smiling. It was not a kind smile. "Well," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "Looks like I have a guest." I backed away, my eyes darting around for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. "Name's Jacob," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. The click of the lock was like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. "But I suspect you already know that, don't you? Found my little book, did you?" He moved further into the room, and I retreated until my back hit the wall. Now, he said, his tone almost soothing. "No need to be afraid. We're going to have such fun together, you and I." The glint of metal caught my eye. A knife, held casually in his right hand. My breath caught in my throat as the full horror of my situation hit me. I was trapped in this cabin with a madman, miles from help, with a raging storm outside. What followed was the most terrifying night of my life. Jacob toyed with me, alternating between casual conversation and violent outbursts. He told me about the others, these guests, who had come before me, how some had lasted days, others only hours. All the while, that knife never left his hand. I tried to reason with him, to appeal to any shred of humanity he might have left. But looking into his eyes, I saw nothing but a dark, twisted joy. This was a game to him, and I was just the latest piece on his board. As the night wore on, I felt myself growing weaker, whether from fear, exhaustion, or something he had slipped into the water he forced me to drink. I wasn't sure, but I knew that if I didn't act soon, I would become just another entry in that horrifying diary. It was nearly dawn when I saw my chance. Jacob had been growing increasingly erratic, his movements less coordinated. In a moment of carelessness, he set the knife down on the table. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the handle just as he realized his mistake. What happened next was a blur of violence and desperation. We grappled, each of us fighting for control of the knife. I felt the blade slice into my arm, but the pain was distant, overwhelmed by the surge of adrenaline and the absolute certainty that this was my only chance at survival. Somehow, through luck or sheer will, I ended up on top. The knife plunged deep into Jacob's chest. His eyes widened in surprise, then anger, then finally went blank as the life drained out of him. I scrambled away, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The storm had passed, and in the gray light of dawn, the cabin looked different, smaller somehow, less of a shelter and more of a tomb. Moving on autopilot, I gathered my things and stumbled out into the cool morning air. I walked for hours, my mind blank, putting as much distance between myself and that cabin as I could. When I finally reached a ranger station, I broke down, the events of the night pouring out of me in a jumbled, hysterical rush. The aftermath was a whirlwind of police interviews, medical examinations, and traumatic flashbacks. They found the cabin, and with it, evidence of Jacob's other victims. Families finally got closure for loved ones long missing. I was hailed as a hero, the one who had finally ended Jacob Hawthorne's reign of terror. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt broken, haunted by the memory of that night and the lives that had been lost in that lonely cabin. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars ran deep. It's been years now, and I've learned to live with what happened. Therapy helped, as did the support of my family and friends. I even started hiking again, though never alone, and never in that part of the country. But sometimes, on stormy nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself back in that cabin. I feel the weight of the knife in my hand, see the light fade from Jacob's eyes, and I remember how thin the line is between safety and danger, between being the victim and becoming something else entirely. The cabin in the woods was supposed to be a shelter from the storm. Instead, it became the eye of a hurricane that changed my life forever. It taught me that sometimes, the most dangerous storms are the ones that rage inside the human heart, and that survival often comes at a cost we can never fully anticipate. The laughter of children filled the air, a stark contrast to the chill that ran down my spine as I spotted him. A lone figure with a camera, his lens trained not on the carousel or the cotton candy stands, but on the playground. In that moment, I didn't know that my instinct to intervene would plunge me into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. It was the 4th of July, and the local park was buzzing with activity. Families sprawled on picnic blankets, the scent of barbecue mingling with the sweet aroma of funnel cakes. I was there with my sister and her kids, enjoying a rare day off from my job as a social worker. It was supposed to be a day of relaxation and celebration, but years of working with at-risk children had honed my senses to potential threats. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was a parent, capturing memories of his own child. But as I watched him move from one group of kids to another, always keeping his distance, always alone, the unease in my gut grew. His camera was professional grade, far too expensive for casual vacation shots. I nudged my sister. "Hey, Sarah, do you see that guy over there? The one with the camera?" She followed my gaze and her brow furrowing. "Yeah, what about him?" "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice low. "Something feels off. He's been taking pictures of the kids for the last half hour, but I haven't seen him with any family." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "You don't think—" I nodded grimly. "I'm going to go talk to him. Can you keep an eye on the kids?" She grabbed my arm. "Be careful, Alex. What if he's dangerous?" I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "I deal with all sorts of people at work, remember? I'll be fine. Just maybe have your phone ready, just in case." As I approached the man, I tried to project an air of casual friendliness. He was middle-aged, unremarkable in appearance, dressed in khakis and a polo shirt. He could have been anyone's neighbor or co-worker. "Beautiful day for pictures, isn't it?" I said, coming to stand beside him. He startled slightly, lowering his camera. "Oh, yes, it is." "You must be getting some great shots of your kids," I probed, watching his reaction carefully. A flicker of something, panic, anger, crossed his face before he smoothed it into a smile. "No kids of my own. I'm a freelance photographer. Just capturing the spirit of the holiday, you know?" Alarm bells were ringing in my head now. "Oh, who do you freelance for?" He hesitated, just a fraction too long. "Various local publications. Nothing you'd have heard of, probably." I decided to push harder. "You know, as a parent, I'd be a little uncomfortable with a stranger taking pictures of my kids without permission. Maybe you should stick to the decorations and food stands." His demeanor changed instantly. The friendly facade dropped away, replaced by something cold and hard. "Listen, lady," he growled. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a public park. I have every right to be here and take pictures of whatever I want." I stood my ground, even as my heart raced. "Actually, you don't. Not of minors without parental consent. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call the police." For a moment, I thought he might back down, but then his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with bruising force. "You're not calling anyone," he snarled. What happened next was a blur of motion and adrenaline. I twisted, breaking his grip the way I'd been taught in self-defense classes. He lunged at me, his camera swinging wildly. I ducked, feeling the rush of air as it missed my head by inches. People were starting to notice now. I could hear shouts, the screams of frightened children. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sarah on her phone, presumably calling 911. The man must have realized he was drawing too much attention. He turned to run, but I couldn't let him get away. Not when I was sure now that my suspicions had been right. I tackled him from behind, sending us both crashing to the ground. We grappled in the dirt, him trying to break free, me desperately trying to hold on until help arrived. He was stronger than me, but I had the advantage of righteous anger and the determination of someone who had seen too many children hurt by predators like him. Finally, I heard the blessed sound of police sirens. The man redoubled his efforts to escape, landing a solid punch to my ribs that left me gasping. But it was too late for him. Strong hands pulled him off me, and I looked up to see two officers wrestling him into handcuffs. As I sat up, wincing at the pain in my side, I saw his camera lying in the grass where it had fallen during our struggle. The screen was cracked, but it was still on. And what I saw on that screen made my blood run cold. It wasn't just pictures of children at the park. There were other images, darker, more sinister. Children in various states of undress, in poses no child should ever be in. My stomach churned, and I had to look away. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and medical checks. The man, it turned out, was wanted in 3 states for production and distribution of child pornography. My instincts had been right, and my actions had likely saved countless children from becoming his victims. But as the adrenaline wore off and the reality of what had happened sank in, I found myself shaking uncontrollably. Sarah hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "But I wasn't," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. And neither was anyone else. In the days and weeks that followed, I was hailed as a hero. Local news stations wanted interviews. Parents from the park reached out to thank me. But I couldn't shake the darkness of what I'd seen, the knowledge of what that man had been doing and what he had planned to do. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor, determined to do more to protect vulnerable children. I advocated for stronger laws, better resources for law enforcement to catch predators. But at night, I was haunted by nightmares of the struggle in the park, of the images on that camera, of all the children I couldn't save. It took time and therapy, but eventually I learned to live with what had happened. I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, couldn't unknow the darkness that lurked in some people's hearts. But I could use that knowledge, that experience, to make a difference. Years later, I still go to that park on the 4th of July. I watch the children play, listen to their laughter, and feel a bittersweet mixture of joy and vigilance. The world can be a dangerous place, but it's also full of beauty and innocence worth protecting. Sometimes, I catch myself scanning the crowd, looking for lone figures with cameras. Old habits die hard, I suppose. But now, instead of fear, I feel a sense of determination. Because I know that for every predator out there are people like me, willing to stand up, to intervene, to protect those who can't protect themselves. The man with the camera taught me a harsh lesson about the realities of the world, but he also showed me the power of trusting your instincts, of being willing to act even when it's scary or uncomfortable. One person can make a difference. One moment of courage can change lives. As the fireworks explode overhead, painting the sky in bursts of red, white, and blue, I silently renew my commitment to be that person, to have that courage. Because in the end, that's what true freedom is about. Not just celebrating our nation, but protecting the most vulnerable among us. The 4th of July will always be a day of mixed emotions for me now. A reminder of a terrifying encounter, yes, but also of the strength I found within myself, and the knowledge that sometimes, ordinary people can be the heroes our world so desperately needs.